Okay, all right. Well, good morning and welcome to the Hopkins LAC Legislative Action Coalition Candidate Forum for 2024. And thank you for joining us on what I'm sure is a busy Sunday for a lot of people. I'm sorry, Saturday. Yeah, not Sunday. And thank you
Wow,
to
did
all
Saturday
the
go by?
candidates who will be showing up today. We would like to welcome a candidate for Senate District 45, Ann Johnson Stewart. We had gotten a confirmation from Kathleen Falk that she would also participate, and she made the decision yesterday to withdraw from this candidate forum. So it's Ann Johnson Stewart speaking only today regarding this very important campaign. This is the only Senate campaign that's going on in the state this year, and it will determine who controls the Senate. So it's a very important race. So we'd like to welcome you to this. First of all, we've got a picture there of some of our student reps posing with someone who used to be a representative for our district, Peggy Flanagan, who's now a lieutenant governor. Next slide, please. So this is what the Legislative Action Coalition does. We're comprised of school board members, parents, students, and community members. We advocate for the Hopkins School District, mostly at the state level. We work closely with our district leadership to identify the most pressing issues that affect the Hopkins School District. And we create a legislative platform that gets approved by our school board every session. And we found that it's a very valuable resource for our legislators. So we're glad to be in touch with them on a regular basis. And we do attend an annual day of advocacy at the Capitol. Next slide, please. This is the Hopkins School District. It runs all the way from the border of Minneapolis down to Eden Prairie, parts of Eden Prairie. We include parts or all of 8 different municipalities. There's 7 different municipalities, and we cross over several different legislative districts. At this time, we've got, what is it, Catherine? 9 legislators that represent the district in the state legislature. So today's schedule is that we will have 6 separate sessions. You can watch live on YouTube, and all sessions will be available for later viewing on our YouTube channel. Audience questions on education may be submitted on YouTube during the session. So here are the forum guidelines. LAC does not support or oppose any political party or candidate. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates and not of the Hopkins LAC or Hopkins Public Schools. The purpose of this forum is to offer an opportunity for voters to hear their candidates discuss important education issues. And we only focus on education issues that will affect students and families in our school district and across Minnesota. And we are a nonpartisan advocacy group. Guidelines for constituent questions that may come in. We have had the opportunity to have community input via email or scanning the QR code on our website. Questions that are unclear, hostile, or of a personal nature will not be used. Questions that are similar may be combined and summarized by the moderator. And questions may be submitted via chat during the Facebook Live event. I don't know if we've got Facebook Live working right now, but if it is working, we will accept questions that way. And only questions related to education will be entertained for the purposes of this forum. So, and each candidate will be given 2 minutes to introduce themselves, 1 minute for a concluding statement. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question presented by the moderator, which in this case, we're going to waive since we only have one participant in this particular session. And we will not keep track of the 2-minute countdown. So, and we would like to remind candidates that this is not a debate. So if we had another candidate, we would ask that they not address one another. And we do reserve the right to utilize the mute feature if the candidate does not abide by this format. So first candidate is Ann Johnson Stewart, who's running for Senate District 45. And Ann, will you take 2 minutes to introduce yourself and your campaign?
Of course. Thank you, Steve. It's good to see all of you again.
I can't hear you. You're muted.
I'm not muted, though. Can anybody else hear me?
Maybe I'm muted. There.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
I can.
Okay, excellent. Well, hi, everyone. It's good to see you again. I worked with Hopkins LAC when I was in the Senate, and it was a really positive relationship. It's good to hear from parents and teachers and school board members and superintendents, because for me, our public school system is one of our core responsibilities as a state to both fund and to support. So I'm glad to be here. I'm Ann Johnson Stewart, and I'm running for state Senate. Again, it is the only Senate election that we're having this fall because our senator has resigned to run for Congress. I'm a civil engineer, a former small business owner, and a former state senator. I teach at the University of Minnesota. I am running to make sure that every Minnesota student receives a world-class education and every Minnesota teacher has the resources to deliver it. I live in Minnetonka with my husband and our 2 dogs. We've raised our 4 kids here, and they all graduated from Wayzata Public Schools, including my husband. I'm an active volunteer at both Birchview Elementary and Plymouth Creek, where my 3 grandkids attend school. My parents were public school teachers and union members, as were my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, my brothers, and most of my parents' friends. They all taught me the value of hard work, the importance of public schools, and how having a world-class education can provide the opportunity for all of us to live our best lives. And as a teacher myself for over 30 years, I have seen the impact of smaller class sizes and adequate resources and the difference it makes when my students are well-rested and well-fed. I also have mentored hundreds of people as they launch their careers or find new ones. And I see firsthand the value that education and workforce training provides. Voters can trust me to invest in public schools and make sure that no child is forgotten. The end.
Well, thank you, Ann. We've got 3 prepared questions that all of the candidates today have received in advance. And the first one was regarding vouchers. In recent years, numerous proposals have been made in the legislature to provide funding, public funding, for private and religious schools, either directly through vouchers or indirectly through tax credits, tax sheltered accounts, or by routing tuition through tax-exempt organizations. What's your position on providing public funding for non-public schools? And please explain your reasoning.
Well, I'm solidly against vouchers for private schools, and I voted against them when I was in the Senate. So if anybody doubts me, there's film to prove it. Here's why. Vouchers divert funds from public schools and decrease the resources that we have for students who remain in the public system. That is my first priority. The public has less control over the policies and values that guide private schools. And private schools that accept vouchers are not subject to the same accountability measures as public schools. This lack of oversight can impact what a child is taught or learns. I'm really concerned that vouchers can contribute to racial and socioeconomic segregation, as families may choose schools based on factors other than educational quality, such as demographics or religious affiliation. And this is probably my number two reason. The first is funding, but second most important to me, sub-private schools may not be equipped to support students with disabilities or special needs. This leads to inadequate educational experiences for those students. And only public schools are required to accommodate their education. If a private school chooses to or cannot accommodate a student with a disability or special needs, they don't have to. They can discharge the student, who then must be accepted by a public school, even if this happens after a voucher has been cashed in. I am very much against vouchers. While my Republican colleagues and opponents may argue that vouchers promote choice and competition, data and studies show that this is not the case. We have school choice in Minnesota through open enrollment and other means. And again, my first priority is to funding public schools.
All right, thank you, Ann.
I have to admit, I have a cold, so I apologize if I'm sniffly.
Fine. Our next question is regarding school funding. If you're elected, your oath to uphold the state constitution includes the education clause, which reads in part, the legislature shall make such provisions by taxation or otherwise as will secure a thorough and efficient system of public schools throughout the state. As you are aware, increases in state funding formula are not keeping up with inflation and expenses. The consumer price index increases over the last 2 years have ranged from 2.5% to 9.1%. The increase in the formula in 2023 still resulted in deficit spending in some districts, even with reductions to curb expenses, and that happened also in Hopkins, due in part to many new mandates that came with the funding increase. Do you support an increase in the per pupil formula and removal of the current cap of 3% on the inflation factor for per pupil formula? And do you have any additional solutions to secure sound funding for Minnesota public schools?
All right. Well, first of all, can I go?
Yeah.
First of all, it's important to remember that both Senate education chairs, policy and funding, are experienced teachers with over 55 years of teaching between them. I know both Senators Kunesh and Swadzinski. They're committed to education and have both won awards for their work. I am confident in their ability to oversee both policy and financing of education. Secondly, mandates equal accountability. So many of the mandates that have been tossed around, and I was frankly expecting my opponent to be here because she talks about them frequently, are in fact not mandates, but targeted funding in the areas that the legislature considered a priority. But I really want to answer your question. The question is, do I support an increase in the per pupil formula and removal of the cap? And I have to say that the cap has only been in place for 2 years, and we have not been through a budget year. So we don't know what the budget targets are going to be. And so I feel like it's premature for me to say yes or no. What I do support is adequate funding for public schools. Superintendents and principals lobbied hard for budgeting tied to inflation, which I think is good, and which resulted in the current cap of 3%. Remember that the legislature is not restricted from providing additional funding. So we have this cap that's been indexed to inflation, but we can also increase it as needed. What I've seen from both Senators Kunesh and Swadzinski is a commitment to fund public schools, and I'm grateful for their work. In terms of additional funding for public schools, I think it's really important that we find solid ongoing ways so that future legislatures are not using education funding to balance their budgets. We've seen that under previous GOP leadership. And it would be great. We hear a lot about federal mandates that are not funded. It'd be great if the federal government would fund their mandates, but that's no excuse for us. I read the Star Tribune this morning. Just today, there's an article on referendums and the number of school referendums that voters will be voting on in November. I think we are so lucky that here in Senate District 45, we live in a community where we have property tax. We have a property tax base, and we have the community that funds those referendums. We also have school districts that are savvy and well-funded and can successfully run a referendum campaign. Unfortunately, that's not true for many local or for many rural schools. So I think it's very unfair that we expect school referendums to take up the gap. And so I will work to support fully funding our schools, regardless of where they are and regardless of what the property tax base is. Senator Kunish and I had a conversation. She mentioned that she's created a commission to understand how the DNR is investing in our school trust lands program. These are lands that were constitutionally set aside to generate income to supplement school funding. And I know that Senator Kunish had some concerns about just wanted to know more about how they were working. I don't want to put any note on that. So I look forward to seeing what happens with that and ways that even that fund can increase funding for public schools.
All right.
And the end.
Very thorough answer. Thank you. Question number 3 is regarding the Minnesota Department of Education. And it asks, how does your vision for public education in Minnesota align with the priorities of MDE? I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look at what their North Star plan looks like, but like your reaction to that.
Thank you, Steve. Of course, I've read through this and I appreciate you giving me the links right in the question. So that was very helpful. I hope that we all align with their priorities. If you read the plan, this is for people watching, it includes actions to support students, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, where we saw a significant impact on reading, math, test scores. It also calls to reform our school finance system, which is something that I just talked about, expand opportunities for students in greater Minnesota, again, in areas where they do not have the property tax base or the same funding opportunities as those of us in highly populated areas. We see disparities, and then build the most qualified and diverse teaching workforce in the nation. It also ensures academic standards that address modern needs of the workforce, which I love. I think we should be bringing in, we used to call it VOTEC or industrial arts. My brother and my grandpa were both industrial arts teachers, so I would hope to see more of that. And it includes a focus on ethnic studies that are reflective of students of color and Indigenous students. I think that's an important objective to close the opportunity gap and disparities that we see across our student population. Within the last 2 years, the legislature allocated millions of dollars. I'm very much in support of the universal school meals program, regardless of where students live. I hear from parents that they love this. I hear from educators that it's great that all children receive these meals and nobody knows who needs them and who doesn't. I was very much in favor of the Senate or of the legislature allocating almost $400 million for early learning scholarships for low-income families, and over $100 million to address teacher shortages. Believe it or not, this is even a problem in Senate District 45, where the further out you go, teachers are less and less available, and we know we need more teachers. So my vision, there was a question actually that asked for my vision of public schools, and my vision is that every Minnesota student receives a world-class education and every public school teacher has the resources to deliver it. I want every school to have a school nurse, media specialists and librarians, and a variety of specialists that enhance our children's education through art and music. And my vision for public education is that every public school teacher is paid enough to support their family without getting a second job. That's my vision, a vision where we adequately fund public schools regardless of where they are in Minnesota and frankly throughout the country.
All right, thank you, Ann. We now have some extra questions that have come in, and I'd like to address one of them. Manuel, are you going to read one?
Manuel's muted.
Yes. And well, I've got one here that came in. Minnesota is one of 8 states that provides free school meals for students. In all of these states, the program has been more popular than expected. And when we add inflationary costs for food and delivery, all 8 states are over budget. How can Minnesota increase and stabilize future funding to feed students?
Well, we know that this is a really popular program, and we also know that it is costing more than we expected. That's because, well, one of the reasons is because more parents have opted in than were originally getting school lunch. So my daughter, for example, has 3 kids at Wayzata Public Schools. And prior to this program, they have the means, of course, to send bag lunch every day, but found that her kids really liked the hot lunch. And so this is an example of a family that doesn't necessarily need the funded school lunch program, but they're taking advantage of it. Now, I support that. I remember every morning what a pain in the butt it was to pack lunch to my kids. And I also support the fact that we no longer are making kids who don't have money eat peanut butter sandwiches and run around with a big stamp on the back of their hand. That is demeaning. And I think every child deserves to be fed. So the question was about budgeting. I think we just budget it. I think we find ways, just like we find ways to fund other things we value, we find ways to fully fund it. I think this is a state program. It should be funded by the state and not rely on individual school districts who are already very stretched to fund the gap. So I will commit to funding this along with my colleagues. Of course, one senator doesn't do everything, but I think this is a responsibility of the state, given that it's a mandate.
All right, thank you. Schools have changed how they deliver education, but not how they assess students. What are your thoughts on changing how to measure student success?
Well, I'm a teacher. I've been a teacher for 30 years, and we have to go through accreditation even at the college level. So I know a lot about performance measures. So these are based on a hierarchy. I don't want to get too crazy here, but they're based on things that are demonstrable or demonstratable, depending on how you say that word. So I know as a teacher that my students may learn the key skills that I'm teaching them, but they may not do well on a test. So I teach surveying, for example. So it's for me to lay out Bloom's taxonomy and say students must be able to demonstrate or describe or any of those words that as teachers we can grab for performance measures. I think those are ways that we can measure success. That's why they're called performance measures. And so while I think testing is fine, I also know that some students do not do well under testing. And I think we should keep it, of course, absolutely. We need some universal objective measure, but we can also look for other non-written ways to measure student success. Attendance, for example. We know that attendance is directly related to student success. And if student can't be present in class, I think that's a performance measure. I think to be there, and in fact, that's one of the criteria I have for one of my classes at the university. In order for a student to receive 15% of their grade, they have to show up. Now, at the college level, we are very much more flexible in how we can uh, address performance measures, but definitely being in your seat is one of them. Being able to, for a small child, being able to go to the bathroom themselves and wash their hands and practice safe hygiene. That's nothing you can put on a test, but it's definitely something a child needs before they move on to first grade or even be allowed into kindergarten. So I think I guess to summarize, there are many performance measures that have nothing to do with written exams. And I believe we could incorporate those into how we measure students' success and their readiness to advance.
Thank you. Manuel, you have a question?
Hi, yes. I have a question from the community. Many Hopkins public schools are unsafe for children to walk or bike to. We know that walking to school has tremendous mental and physical health benefits for students. What will you do to expand the safe routes to school available for students?
Was writing down safe routes to schools before you even said it. So I'm a civil engineer, and in my history, I've worked on many safe routes to school projects. It is so important, especially in the suburban area where our communities have been built to accommodate cars and not pedestrians. So even in my history of living here in this house for 30 years, we were successful in getting a sidewalk and I'm trying to think what they're called, automated pedestrian device warnings, whatever the buttons are, so that children could walk to school. That is a really important thing. So this is an easy answer. I am a huge advocate for safe routes to schools. A lot of that is federal funding. In fact, I think all of it is federal funding. I would very much advocate for implementing more state funding for safe routes to schools. As an aside, the Minnesota County Road Safety Plan. Okay, I'm not going to get too technical, so don't fall asleep here, but this is federal money that Minnesota also receives grants from the state and counties to implement trails and trails and sidewalks to schools. So imagine me living here in Minnetonka and getting a trail to my kids' school. It's just a sidewalk. But for many children, especially in rural areas, this is a much more significant cost because it's a trail, through, a rural area. And so we do have means to increase the availability of these grants. And frankly, county engineers love it because it gets kids off the county roads and it gets, whether they're biking or walking or it's a parent with a stroller. So I am the one who's really excited about this, especially in the rural areas. But granted, Manuel asked about Hopkins School District. It's true in Minnetonka, West Tonka, and Wayzata school districts as well. County Road 9 in Wayzata is a perfect example where we have kids and their parents walking and biking on a high volume county road. Thankfully, Plymouth is redoing that, but it took some funding from outside resources because cities can't always afford to do this on their own.
Thanks, Ann. Another question we've
Mhm.
got here is that do you have any ideas about how the legislature might help school districts increase and diversify their teaching workforce?
Yes, I do. You backed up a little bit there, but I think you said, do you have ideas about how school districts can increase and diversify their teaching workforce?
Yes.
Okay, so I do have a lot of ideas. So for the last 30 years, I've been working, in addition to teaching, I've also been working with the Department of Transportation and Met Council on increasing the diversity and numbers in their civil engineering workforce. So this is obviously a problem in teaching, but it's also a problem, well, it's a problem in heavy highway building because the state government is required by federal mandate to have a certain amount of diversity on their projects. Okay, so there is a direct parallel here. In schools, we love the idea of diverse teachers because it's great for students to see a variety of models in their teaching and in their educational staff. So my ideas are very much similar to what I've been doing, where we target potential students and participants of color and of gender diversity. In the highway trades, we're also looking for women, which is not the same as in the education business, but we target them. So I have developed, I could see an easy parallel here. I have developed training and taken it, for example, out to the Indian reservations. And I have worked with students to understand the comprehensive requirements for the job. So I can't certify somebody to be a teacher, but what we could do is develop a curriculum, go out to the reservations, go into areas where they have high ethnic diversity, and talk about what it takes to become a teacher. Right now I'm doing training with Met Council, where one-on-one I'm helping people even apply, because we take for granted that people know what it takes to be a teacher, what it takes to get into college, what it takes to be successful. But my experience has shown me that's not true. I know what it takes to be a teacher because my parents were teachers. That was an easy one for me, right? I saw them live their life every day and I saw what being a teacher was like. Well, we don't have that same thing on the Indian reservations or in areas where we have high diversity. So I would very much love to work with Senators Kunish and Swadzinski on a workforce training program. That again, I'm not saying that we let people in to be teachers that do not have the training or certification. Absolutely not. But the I think the challenge is getting them to understand the career path, and we can do that.
All right. Another question here came in regarding the requirement that that school districts provide unemployment benefits from the state when school is out of session for education support professionals, including nutrition staff, paraprofessionals, bus drivers, etc. In Hopkins, we fully support this financial cushion because it provides our essential staff, that it provides us essential staff during the summer months. But we're concerned about how our district will fund this unemployment insurance after June of 2027, which is when the one-time funding ends. Do you have any ideas about how we can continue funding this benefit for school staff?
Well, I remember this issue because we tried to get it implemented when I was in the Senate, but we were in the minority and we were not able to get it through. So I share your support. I think this is a good program, especially given that support staff, bus drivers, lunch ladies, et cetera, they really don't make enough money to take the 3 months without pay. So then they're looking for other jobs and then they have to quit, and it's just a terrible cycle, especially for people who really love their jobs and they would love to make it their career. School bus drivers, that's their career, and they should be able to support themselves on that. The funding is done June 2027, which gives us 3 years to figure out what we'll actually have 4 years by then, 4 or 5 years. I forgot what year this got put in, but we'll be able to look at data and see how much it actually costs. And I'm confident that by then we can figure out a way to address the true costs of this. We're kind of in a pilot program because it's brand new. And so if we know how much it truly costs, frankly, my only answer is we need to address it from the state level. Again, it's a state mandate, it's a requirement. I think we all value it. And if we're going to make it work, schools need to have adequate funding for it. So I don't have any creative ideas, but what I do say is we should look at the data, see how much it costs, see who's really using it. You know, we might say that everybody's going to go on unemployment, but some people may choose not to. Some people may work at a summer camp or may have a job that they love. Oh my gosh, do you know how many teachers work for the DOT in the summer? That is a great job. They make like $30 an hour. So we may find after years of implementation, how much this really costs, and then make sure that it's funded.
Okay, and we've got one final question here for you before we wrap up. Would you be willing to vote against your caucus's position if it is in the best interest of your local school districts?
Oh, yes, of course. Of course I would. The challenge is, or the reality is that after serving one term, so only 2 years, after serving 1 term, I didn't have this challenge ever because our caucus was, firmly in support of public schools. Greg Paulson was was the lead of the education committee when I was there, and I would consult with him all the time. He was a teacher, he was a superintendent. I would talk to SWAT and I would talk to Mary Kunish, but there was never a hard vote for me when it came to education. And like I said, I stood on the floor, spoke against vouchers. Roger Chamberlain was chair at the time, and he challenged me on my facts, which were, in fact, I was the one saying the true thing. So the fact that the education chair, and I disagreed, I was willing to stick my neck out for that, and I will again. So yes, as I said, you can trust me to also be in communication with the school districts that are in my district. When I was a senator, I met with them regularly. I will continue to do that. I met with superintendents, and of course, with all the teachers that I know, I'm pretty well informed about what was happening, and I plan on doing that again.
That's reassuring to hear. Thank you. Well, with that, we'll allow you to take 1 minute to make a closing statement.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to say out loud, recorded, how much I support public schools. I am 100% dedicated to it, making sure that our public schools and our public teachers and our public support staff and our public school facilities, we often forget about the facilities, are well funded and supported by our state government. There is so much at stake in this election, state election for public education. My opponent and I have very different visions for our state. My vision is one that moves Minnesota forward and supports public schools. That's our duty, and I take it seriously. I served in the Senate when Republicans were in the majority. Even with a $9 billion surplus, they proposed almost zero money for public schools. I couldn't believe it. I remember voting against a $230 million voucher program and challenging the education chair on the Senate floor about the way his voucher program would work. I also remember Republicans' approach to reducing gun violence in schools. No discussion, no hearings, and no action. This election is about moving Minnesota forward and continuing the progress we made, and I ask for your vote on November 5th. Thanks again for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you, Ann, and thank you for powering through with your cold. We'd like to
It
thank
got
you for
better
your...
over the time. I think the drugs kicked in.
Oh, good, good. We'd like to thank you for your time today and for your interest in education issues. The LAC members, along with your constituents, enjoy learning more about your priorities for education funding and policies that will affect the future of Minnesota students. And we appreciate your candidacy and wish you best of luck in November 5th elections. So thank you today.
Thank you. Thank
All right.
all of you. I appreciate your time.
All right.
Joining us. My name is Jen Cameron. I am a member of the Hopkins LAC, the Legislative Action Coalition. Steve Adams and I and one of our student board reps, Manuel, will be your hosts this morning. And we would like to welcome our candidates for District 43B. Mike Freiberg has joined us here on the call, and Steve Merriman sent us a message just in the last few minutes that he would not be joining us. And so we will have Representative Mike Freiberg and We'll have you answer some questions. But first, I would like to invite you to just take 2 minutes and introduce yourself and your concern.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So thank you to the Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition for scheduling this event. For those who don't know me, I grew up in Golden Valley. I attended schools in the Hopkins School District through 7th grade. I currently have 2 kids attending schools in the Robbinsdale School District. I work as a public health attorney and have been a state representative for 12 years. The recent legislative session was historic. After many years of divided government that prevented meaningful progress for our state, we passed universal free school meals, we legalized cannabis, we adopted gun violence prevention measures, we codified reproductive freedom and banned forever chemicals. As your state representative, I played a key role in delivering this legislation. I authored 36 bills that became law, at least in part. These bills ranged in topics from service learning to funding a fire station in our district, to healthcare policy, to sewer infrastructure, to land surveying, to consumer fraud, to the state flag. I chaired the elections committee, helping pass legislation such as automatic voter registration, pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds, restore the vote, the Minnesota Voting Rights Act, and the National Popular Vote Compact. But more needs to be done to build a state that works for everyone. We need to continue investing in our public schools, fund transit that will benefit the suburbs, and continue protecting our environment. I'm sure during this event, we'll discuss issues of importance to residents of Crystal, Golden Valley, Plymouth, and Robbinsdale, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, sir. I am going to walk through some housekeeping. You can see here on our first slide this photo of our some of our student board reps with our Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. I'll give you a quick skinny on what the Hopkins Public Schools Legislative Action Coalition does. We are a nonpartisan advocacy group comprised of school board members, parents, students, and other community members. We advocate for education funding and policies at both the state and federal levels, working closely with district leadership to identify pressing education issues each year. So we create a legislative platform that is approved by our school board to represent the district's priorities. And we're recognized by our legislators as being a valuable resource. We partner with the AMSD, MSBA, and neighboring school district advocacy groups. We host community events on education finance, special education, and school safety. And we organize a day of advocacy at the Capitol, including individual meetings with our 9 legislators. What you'll see now is a map of Hopkins schools. We have a wide district with our district really spanning all the way from Golden Valley up in your neck of the woods, Representative Freiberg, all the way to Eden Prairie and in between. So 7 cities are represented here in our Hopkins School District, which gives us a wide, diverse constituency. Here's the schedule for the day. We had Ann Johnson Stewart join us at the 9 a.m. hour. Kathleen Folk also was unable to join us. And will be followed with a 11, 1, 2, and 3. So we invite everyone to join us and learn more about your candidates. Here's some guidelines to stick to. We'll tell you a little bit about how we're going to host, and then we'll also tell you a little bit about the rules. The LAC does not support or oppose any political party or candidate. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates and not of the LAC or of Hopkins Public Schools. The purpose of this forum is to offer an opportunity for voters to hear the candidates discuss important education issues that will affect students and families in our school district and across Minnesota. And Public Schools Legislative Action Coalition is a nonpartisan advocacy group. The community had the opportunity to submit questions in advance. We gave a QR code publicly as well as via email. Questions that are unclear, hostile, or of a personal nature will not be used. Questions that are similar may be combined and summarized by the moderators. And questions are can be submitted via chat on the YouTube live stream right now. And the YouTube live stream is being sent directly to Facebook Live. So you can really put questions in Facebook or in YouTube. The moderator will treat them as stated above, though only questions related to education will be entertained for the purposes of this forum. Again, with some moderation, each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves and 1 minute for a concluding statement. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question presented. The timekeeper will present a running timer, which for the purposes of this particular forum, I don't know that we will need, but the LAC would like to remind candidates that this is not a debate. Don't debate yourself. Please do not address one another, and we reserve the right to utilize the mute feature if the candidate exceeds the time or doesn't abide by this format. We'll start with question 1. In recent years, numerous proposals have been made in the legislature to provide public funding for private and religious schools, either directly through vouchers or indirectly through tax credits, tax sheltered accounts, or by routing tuition through tax exempt organizations. What is your position on providing public funding for non-public schools? And please explain your reasoning.
Sure. Thank you for the question. I oppose vouchers and I oppose diverting money from our public school system. Public funds should be used for public schools, and vouchers also run the risk that public funds will be used to advance a religious message, which would be in violation of the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And just generally speaking, I feel like there's been an overemphasis on so-called school choice that's undermined our public school system by diverting resources away from neighborhood schools. I think the legislature should refocus on its mission under the state constitution of establishing a general and uniform system of public schools. And I feel like vouchers kind of go against that principle. So I would oppose efforts to create a voucher system.
Thank you. Steve, do you want to ask question number 2?
Sure. Regarding school funding, if elected, your oath to uphold the Minnesota State Constitution includes the education clause, which reads in part, the legislature shall make such provisions by taxation or otherwise as will secure a thorough and efficient system of public education throughout the state. And as you are aware, the increases in the state funding formula are not keeping up with inflation and expenses. The consumer price index increased over the last 2 years anywhere between 2.5% to 9.1%. The increase in the formula in 2023 still resulted in a deficit in some districts, even with reductions to curb expenses, due in part to many new mandates that came with the funding increase. Do you support an increase in the per pupil formula and a removal of the current cap of 3% on the inflation factor for the per pupil formula? And do you have any additional solutions to secure sound funding for Minnesota public schools?
Yeah, thank you for the question. We made huge steps in funding our schools in the recent legislative session. Schools will get an automatic 2% increase in the general education formula every year. And that's not every biennium, but every year. Certainly, though, more needs to be done to make districts whole after more than a decade of underinvestment into our public school system as a result of divided government. So I support increasing the formula. I'm not sure about changing the cap on the inflation factor. My understanding is inflation rarely goes over 3%. And changing it could have big effects on the state budget, which we're constitutionally required to keep balanced. But certainly, anything can be up for discussion. I think after consulting with the various stakeholders, it's something I'd be willing to look into. And I think just generally speaking, we need to make sure that there's a reliable, dedicated source of funding for our public schools. As I said, we made a great deal of progress in the past session in that regard, but just given the underinvestment in our schools over the last 10 plus years, I think it's, we still have a ways to go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question number 3 is, how does your vision for public education in Minnesota align with the priorities of the Minnesota Department of Education?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I looked, so the way the question was submitted, it talked specifically about the Due North, Minnesota's education plan. I wasn't super familiar with that, just to be honest. It looks like it was kind of created to help us come out of the pandemic, and it's a couple years old at this point. I mean, certainly it seems to include provisions I support in general. I mean, and just looking through it, it looks like it includes a lot of provisions that we've already passed. So we expanded full service community schools. We provided dedicated funds to hire school counselors, psychologists, and nurses. We invested in teachers of color and expanded access to ethnic studies. It seems to include a lot of important provisions that are things that I generally support. So I'm certainly willing to keep working on the provisions that we haven't done, and look forward to continuing to invest in our schools in the upcoming session.
Thank you. We have a couple of additional questions from community members that our student board rep Manuel is going to ask. I will tee him up here. Are you there, Manuel?
Hello, yes. So I have a few questions from our community. Many Hopkins public schools are unsafe for children to walk or bike to. We know that walking to school has tremendous mental and physical health benefits for students. What will you do to expand the safe routes to school available for students?
Yeah, I'm a strong supporter of the State Routes for School program. I understand, I think certainly it's a federal state partnership that we need to keep working on. I think we should work with the cities and counties in our districts just to ensure that there's adequate bike trail. A lot of pedestrian facilities aren't things that are passed at the school level. So I think it's going to require partnership with cities and counties. Certainly there are things I think we can do to help schools with it, whether it's providing funding for bike racks or things like that. But generally speaking, I'm a strong supporter of this. I think cities generally need to be more walkable. And I think that's absolutely true when you're talking about students having the ability to get to their schools, and that should be true any season of the year, I would say too. So I think cities need to make sure that sidewalks and bike trails are plowed so that people can get places in the winter and students can get to school. So yeah, strong supporter of it. I think that's a great question. Thank you for asking.
Of course. Minnesota is one of 8 states that provides free school meals for students. In all of these states, the program is more popular than expected and more families are participating. When we add inflationary costs for food and delivery, all 8 states are over budget. How can Minnesota increase and stabilize future funding to feed students?
Yeah, we did include an inflationary adjustment to the general education formula, and certainly I think inflation is something we need to take into account, in every aspect of school financing, because we want to make sure our schools remain whole. I think finding dedicated fund, I think the continued increases in the general education formula will help. I think we may need to look at something like that with the school meals program as well, quite frankly, because I'm a strong supporter of the school meals program. I think it's one of the top accomplishments of this past session, and we need to make sure that it continues to be a robust program and that there's the resources necessary for schools to continue funding meals for students. So yeah, that's something I certainly support continuing to look at to make sure we can continue to provide it to our students.
Would you be willing to vote against your caucus's position if it is in the best interest of your local school district?
Yeah, I mean, we're there to represent our districts and our constituents. So if there were something that I felt, was not representative of the district, I would certainly, prioritize my constituents. I mean, it's not, generally speaking, my beliefs match up pretty well with the caucus. And I think it's fair to say the constituents that I represent line up pretty well with what we as a caucus have passed in the Minnesota legislature, but certainly there are occasions where, you know, you have to vote with your constituents, and I've done that and will continue to do that where it's necessary.
In what ways can the legislature help school districts increase and diversify their teaching workforce?
Yeah, I think you know, we made some investments recruiting teachers of color in the past year. So that teachers can resemble resemble the students that they teach. I think it's students are more effective when they have teachers that they can identify with. So I think continuing to invest in you know, teachers of color, whether it's through recruitment of teachers in non-traditional places or supporting programs like loan forgiveness for people to get their degrees. I'm I'm willing to look at everything just just to continue. I mean, we just need to invest in our teacher workforce generally, but I think in getting a diverse group of teachers is also a critically important component of that, and I support doing so.
In 2023, the Minnesota legislature allocated money to address the cross-subsidy for mandated special education and English learner services. This funding brought school districts halfway there in terms of full funding. What are your plans for filling the remaining and growing funding gap for these services?
Yeah, I mean, hope, you know, this is a promise that the federal government has made to the states, a requirement that this federal government has placed on us without providing funding. So, I mean, my hope would be we can leverage federal funding for it, but I think, you know, we've waited for them for too long. We've seen how dysfunctional the U.S. Congress is. So I think we made a huge step forward by reducing the special education cross subsidy by 44% in fiscal year 24 to 26, by 50% fiscal year 26 and later, as well as the funding for English learners. So, assuming there's continued inaction on the part of Congress, I think that's something we need to look at further. We might need to look at some sort of dedicated revenue source for it because, like I said, we are required to balance the state budget, but I think it is critically important that every student has the opportunity to access education, whether they have a disability or whether they're an English learner. So it's something I'm certainly supportive of continuing to look at and investing at the state level if we have to do so.
As of May 2023, education support professionals, including nutrition staff, paraprofessionals, bus drivers, and other non-licensed hourly paid workers, are eligible to receive unemployment benefits from the state when school is out of session. In Hopkins, we fully support the financial cushion this provides our essential staff during the summer months, but we are concerned about how our district will fund this unemployment insurance after June 2027 when the one-time funding ends. What are your plans to continue funding for this benefit for school staff?
Yeah, I mean, that would be a big expense for school districts. So, sometimes at the legislature, I know we have to make decisions about whether to fund things on a one-time basis or an ongoing basis. I think this is a hugely important one. It's critically important for hourly school workers, enabling them to access unemployment insurance. So I'm hopeful that we can continue to provide it. I mean, I think we'll wait to see what the budget forecast is when we go back into session, that we'll see the February forecast. It's looking positive, like there's going to be a surplus. So I'm hopeful we can use that surplus to invest in some of these critically important ongoing expenses for school districts. And I would support looking into that.
Greater numbers of students are seeking to take advantage of off-campus learning opportunities like PSEO, internships, and apprenticeships. Unfortunately, transportation to these opportunities remains a barrier for equitable access. Do you have ideas on how districts can level the playing field?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we can look at expanded transportation funding at the legislative level, but I think just generally we need to have a stronger system of public transportation in Minnesota. And it's particularly true, I would say, in the inner ring suburbs. If you're in the Minneapolis or St. Paul, there's fairly reliable bus service. If you're in, slightly farther out suburbs, there's the suburban opt-out programs where you can take a bus into the, you know, a nice pushy bus into the core city. But as you get into kind of the inner ring suburbs, I think a lot of times just in terms of bus routes, it isn't there. So, you know, we need to have mass transit. I support the Blue Line extension proposal that would go through Robbinsdale. And I know the Green Line is continuing, and that's probably going to go through the Hopkins School District. That should be online soon. So just, you know, we need to have not only those, but, you know, adequate bus service, I think, throughout the metro area. So I think if we do that, then that will help enable students to access some of these programs like PSEO. So certainly I think the school district has a role to play, but I think, you know, the Met Council and Metro Transit certainly has a role to play as well.
All right, the last question I have is, schools have changed how they deliver education, but not how they assess students. What are your thoughts on changing how to measure student success?
Yeah, you know, I do think there has been something of an over-reliance on testing for funding for schools. So, you know, I would want to work with all of the stakeholders, you know, teachers, student groups, just to find better ways to measure it that are not punitive towards school districts, but that do have some accountability measures in there, and, you know, find ways just to make sure students are meeting their potential in every school district. So, you know, that's certainly something I support looking at.
Thank you. That's all we have.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Mike. We really appreciate your time today and your interest on education issues, the LAC, along with your constituents. Enjoy learning more about your priorities for education funding and policies that affect the future of Minnesota students. We appreciate your candidacy, and we wish you the best of luck in the November elections.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Mike.
Absolutely. If you want to give us a minute of wrap up or parting comments, you're more than welcome.
Sure. Well, yeah, thank you once again to the Hopkins School District Legislative Action Coalition for putting on this forum. I've been knocking on doors and talking to voters since the legislative session ended. If anyone watching has any questions, I hope we can chat in the coming weeks before the election so I can find out what issues are important to you. I'm committed to making sure our public schools have the resources they need to thrive, and that our public schools have the resources they need to be successful. Our public school students, rather, have the resources they need to be successful members of society. If you'd like to learn more about me, you can visit my website, www.mikefreiberg.com. Thanks again for your time. Thanks for this debate, and thank you for your consideration in the upcoming election.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Thank you,
Thank
Mike.
you.
Wonderful. Well, welcome to the Hopkins LAC Virtual Candidate Forum for 2024. Thank you so much for taking time out of what we're sure is a busy Saturday in the middle of your campaign season. The Hopkins LAC members on the call today are Jen Cameron, Shannon Andreessen, Steve Adams is here, and we have a couple of student board reps with us as well, Manuel and Mia, who will be asking some questions later. What the Hopkins Public Schools Legislative Action Coalition does is that we are a nonpartisan advocacy group. We're comprised of school board members, local parents, students, and community members, and we advocate for education funding and policies at both state and federal levels. We work with our district leadership to identify pressing issues, and from that create a legislative platform that is approved by our school board to represent the district's priorities to our legislators. Historically, we have been recognized as a valuable resource to legislators and policymakers and advocacy groups for our research, our community connections, and timely advocacy. We partner with organizations such as AMSD, MSBA, and neighboring school districts to host community events on education finance, special education, and school safety. And typically, we organize an annual day of advocacy at the Capitol, including individual meetings with our 9 legislators. This is a map of the Hopkins School District, which stretches from Minneapolis down to Eden Prairie. It covers 7 parts or all of 7 different municipalities. And the Hopkins Public School District has 4 state senators and 5 state representatives for a total of 9 reps. This is an overview of today's schedule. Currently, we're in the midst of our 11 a.m. session with House District 45B candidate Patty Acomb, and as you can see, we will have several other sessions this afternoon. These are the guidelines that we'll use to run our forum today and throughout the rest of this day. The LAC does not support or oppose any political party or candidate. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates and not of the LAC or Hopkins Public Schools. The purpose of this forum is to offer an opportunity for voters to hear the candidates discuss important education issues that will affect students and families in our school district and across Minnesota. The Public Schools Legislative Action Coalition is a nonpartisan advocacy group. We also had an opportunity for the community to submit questions in advance of this forum. Any questions that the constituents submit that are unclear, hostile, or of a personal nature will not be used. Questions that are similar may be combined and summarized by the moderator. And any questions that are submitted via chat during our Facebook Live event, this Zoom meeting, or the YouTube will be treated by the moderator as stated above. The only questions related to education will be entertained for the purposes of this forum. And now, given all of that, and that we only have one candidate, we will not be running a timer for most of this meeting. Each candidate will be allowed to introduce themselves and we'll have a minute for a concluding statement. And we'll have approximately 2 minutes to answer each question presented by the moderator. The LAC would like to remind candidates that this is not a debate and please do not address one another. And the LAC reserves the right to utilize the mute feature if a candidate exceeds the time or does not abide by this format. Mia, would you like to take over the questions? So this would be question 1, vouchers.
Of course. Sorry. In recent years, numerous proposals have been made in the legislature to provide public funding for private and religious schools, either directly through vouchers or indirectly through tax credits, tax shelters, accounts, or by routing tuitions through tax-exempt organizations. What is your position on providing public funding for non-public schools? Please explain your reasoning.
With that, I will just maybe take 1 second and introduce myself. I'm Representative Patty Acomb, running for my 4th term in the Minnesota House. I, prior to that, served on the Minnetonka City Council for 7 years, so I have a lot of involvement within our community over the last 15 to 20 years. And I am a proud graduate of Hopkins High School. Both of my kids have been recent graduates of Hopkins High School, so I am a strong supporter and appreciate very much the work that the district does. And I will also say that the Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition has an amazing reputation at the Capitol and amongst other school districts in your advocacy, and that your voice has been looked at as a model for other districts to emulate. So good on you for the advocacy work that you do and the priorities that you are fighting for. And so then to address your question, what I will say is I'm a strong supporter that public dollars should be going to public schools. I do not support vouchers and will not support vouchers. I think that our private schools are that. They're private. They should be privately funded, not publicly funded. And so you have no wishy-washy-ness here. I am, as I said, strong believer in public dollars to public schools.
Thank you, Patty. Mia, I just wanted to ask you if you wanted to go ahead and introduce yourself so that the candidate and our public know who you are and what your role is with the LAC and Hopkins Public Schools.
She may have muted her sound so that she didn't get the reverb, so she may not hear that from you. I can pop in. If you want to read the second question, I can pop in and just jump with her.
Okay, Patty, did you want to do a 2-minute introduction of yourself before answering the question?
Thanks, Shannon. I appreciate that. I think my introduction, as part of my answer in the last question, is probably sufficient, but unless you want me to go into more detail.
I didn't know if you had something planned or not. Just wanted to give you an opportunity, if you do, to go ahead and take this time. Otherwise, we can keep going with the questions.
I think you can keep going with the questions, but thank you so much.
Okay, great. Mia, are you ready to introduce yourself? I'll go ahead with question number 2, which has to do with funding. If elected, your oath to uphold the Minnesota State Constitution includes the Education Clause, Article 13, Section 1, which reads in part, "The legislature shall make such provisions by taxation or otherwise as will secure a thorough and efficient system of public schools throughout the state." As you are aware, increases in the state funding formula are not keeping up with inflation and expenses. Consumer Price Index, CPI, increases over the last 2 years have ranged from 2.5% to 9.1%. The increase in the formula in 2023 still resulted in deficit spending in some districts, even with reductions to curb expenses, due in part to many new mandates that came with the funding increase. Do you support an increase in the per pupil formula and removal of the current cap of 3% on the inflation factor for the per pupil formula? And then the follow-up to that is, do you have additional solutions to secure sound funding for Minnesota public schools?
Well, thank you, Shannon. I think that this is kind of the, the heart of where we're at, of the work that we did in 2023 to secure additional funding for our school districts and to tie the annual budget to inflation, or tie an inflation increase or to it. And so I'm very proud of that work. And as you all know, I think it's close to 40% of our state budget is already directed towards schools. And so I recognize what an important role the state has in providing public education to all of our students. And so I take that charge very seriously and certainly want to do all we can to secure that. I do know that schools are struggling. I see that all of our schools, all the schools that I represent, which is Hopkins, Wayzata, and Minnetonka, came to the Capitol last year indicating their need for more funding. So believe me, I hear that loud and clear and want to work to increase that in whatever way we can. And so you've got a partner in me at the Capitol to help do that. And I think that the Hopkins School District in the 2023-24 session was really pretty fortunate to have the 3 of the 4 legislative chairs representing parts of their school district. And so I think the connection and the relationship between Hopkins and the legislature is there, and one that we need to work to strengthen to ensure that we can be getting Hopkins and all of our other schools the support and resources that are needed to provide the public education that they need. I will say that, right now at this moment in time, school districts are feeling the crunch maybe differently from one another, from maybe their neighboring districts. And I think that, solutions were brought to the Capitol last year to increase the referendum amount to be able to go out to voters to approve so that districts could try and fill holes that way. That was brought to me by one of the schools that I represent. It was not brought to me by all of them. And so I think that there might be benefit from to one of the points that was brought up in the introduction to the Hopkins LAC is working in relationship with surrounding districts to come up with solutions that will benefit all of our schools and certainly within our legislative districts. It would be hard for me to support something that just benefited one of my schools without the others. And so I hope that there continue to be talks between neighboring districts about what some of those solutions might be.
Thank you. Mia, do you want to take the next question?
Yes, and also sorry about before. My name is Mia. I'm a senior, and that goes to Hopkins High School. I really love political science. So I'm really happy to have this opportunity. And the question I'm going to be asking is, how does your vision for public education in Minnesota align with the priorities of the Minnesota Department of Education?
Well, congratulations on your senior year, Mia. Make the most of it. And I certainly like your interest in political science, and I'm happy to chat with you more offline about that if there's an interest. I have real concerns, not only opportunity gap, however it is perceived or experienced, that we need to be working hard to reduce that. I have concerns by what I'm hearing from schools and educators that we don't have enough teachers and so, I mean, an idea that I had last year was, why aren't we looking to those kids that want to go to college, are interested in teaching as a profession? If they agree to teach in Minnesota, if we help them with their education, I think, there's a model of Minnesota doing that for doctors. I think that we should be and could be doing that for our teachers. I think Senator Swedzinski said we are headed for a cliff if we don't start recruiting and retaining more teachers. And so certainly I think the benefit to our state would be huge and outweigh the cost of that college education if we can be increasing the number of young people considering going into teaching. It's certainly a challenging profession, and I think the challenges grow every year, and COVID certainly kind of put a highlight on that. So I think we need to be doing more to support our schools. I think Hopkins is doing a great job around recognizing and implementing ways to be addressing mental health. I think that work continues. I think we need to be sure to be helping our seniors or our kids that are looking to what is next, to make sure that we have proper counseling staff to help them decide what those next decisions and those next steps might be for them, and what options and opportunities might be available. So I don't know that I have the exact answer to what it is, but believe me, I see the challenges and want to be a partner to ensure our schools can be successful.
Thank you very much, Patty. Those are the 3 questions that candidates had prepared in advance, and we don't have much time left this morning, but we do have 1 or 2 questions from the community.
Great.
Mia, would you like to take over asking the community questions?
Of course. Okay, so the question that someone asked is, Minnesota is one of 8 states that provide free school meals for students. In all these states, the program is more popular than expected and more families are participating. When we add inflationary costs for food and deliveries, all 8 states are over budgeted. How can Minnesota increase and stabilize future fundings to feed students? Sorry, I can repeat that question if it didn't make sense, because I was stuttering a lot. Okay. Minnesota is one of 8 states that
So
provide
I
free
think I
school meals
understand
for
the gist of the
students.
question.
In all of
And
these states, the program is more popular than expected and more families are participating. When we add inflationary costs for food and deliveries, all 8 states are over budgeted. How can Minnesota increase and stabilize future fundings to feed students?
I think that's a great question, Mia. And I think that, again, Minnesota can be looked at as a leader and as being um, highlighted on the presidential campaign trail this year because of the free lunches, free meals that we're providing students here. I think it was by far the right decision that we made, and I'm glad the program is more successful. That's a good thing. And so, do I have the solution on how we get more money? No, but I think we can feel assured from the support for the program by Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, as well as the majority in the House and the Senate, that you have strong champions and partners at the legislature. I certainly hope that we can hold those majorities in this election to ensure that we can continue to, properly and adequately fund this very important program.
Thank you. Mia, do you have one more community question that
Yeah,
you
of
would like to
course. The second one is many Hopkins public schools are unsafe for children to walk or bike to. We know that walking to school has tremendously mentally and physically. Many Hopkins schools are unsafe for children to walk or bike to. We know that walking to school has tremendously mentally and physically physical health benefit for students. What will you do to expand the safe routes of schools available for students? Sorry about that.
Maria, you're doing a great job. Thank you. And what I will say is I couldn't agree more. The Safe Routes to Schools program is a really great way for city, state, and county governments to work working together to ensure. I'm glad as a member of the letting funding for the city of Minnetonka for the County Road 73 sidewalk that was just put in and will now give safe access to the whole complex there, the high school, North Junior High, as well as Tanglin. And so we need to do that at all of our sites. Baker Road is a prime example of a school that could benefit from safer access. And so I think that we do better when we can partner at all levels of government. And I think that this is recognized as a actually, what I will say, when I first started on the city council in Minnetonka back in 2012, there was not nearly as much focus on adding sidewalks and safe routes as there is today. I think that young families coming into our community see this as a real benefit and an important resource that our city needs to have. And so I think that all of the local communities around Minnetonka, Hopkins, and all of those that serve the Hopkins School District recognize that this is important and valuable. And so I think that we need to be putting more money into that program. And if I understand, I think it also comes with federal dollars. So I think that there are our communities need to continue to apply to get that important funding because it is done by application. And so we need to be continuing to focus on those opportunities for us to get grant money. And that is just one of them.
Thank you so much, Patty. We are almost at time, so I'd like to offer you 1 minute to provide a closing statement.
Thank you all. My apologies again for being late and my deep appreciation for making this happen even late. So thank you for that. Appreciate all the work that you do. What I will say is when I'm knocking on doors and talking with constituents in my district, education is always one of the top issues. And it's something that really frames the quality of our communities. And so I am a strong supporter of public schools in general and Hopkins schools in specific. And I want to work to ensure that you all have the resources needed to help ensure that our kids are getting a good start. I know I benefited from the wonderful education at Hopkins schools, and as well as my kids. And so I want to be a partner. I look forward to hearing about the priorities of the LAC this next year, and want to work to see what we can do to accomplish them.
Wonderful. Well, the Hopkins LAC would like to thank you for your time today and your interest in education issues. The LAC members, along with your constituents, enjoy learning more about your priorities for education funding and policies that will affect the future of all Minnesota students. We appreciate your candidacy and wish you the best of luck in the upcoming November 5th elections.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a great
Thanks,
day.
Patty.
Bye.
Okay, everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to the candidate forum for the Hopkins LAC. We appreciate you joining us. I am going to run through some housekeeping, and then I will give each of you the opportunity to give a 2-minute welcome. I just want to thank you for joining us here in the midst of a busy campaign season. We have with us our candidates from District 46A, Larry Kraft and John Nagel. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you. Why don't we go ahead and each of you take your 2 minutes to introduce yourselves and your campaign, and then I'll run through our housekeeping. Larry, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you so much. So I'm Larry Kraft. I represent most of the community of St. Louis Park. I want to thank the Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition for hosting this forum. I'll start with some background on me. My wife, Lori, and I moved to St. Louis Park 21 years ago when I was recruited to run sales and marketing for a tech company. We have 2 kids who were born here. One is now in college and the other is a senior at St. Louis Park High School. Climate change and the impact it will have on our young people is why I'm involved in politics. 11 years ago, after 25 years in tech, I changed careers. I ran a national nonprofit that helped high school and middle school students take local action on climate change. And in the St. Louis Park and Hopkins School Districts, students I mentored did a fantastic job. In St. Louis Park, they initiated our climate action plan, which passed in 2018 and is the most aggressive city plan in the state. Students in Hopkins High School actually started the process that took a bit longer, but eventually led to Minnetonka recently adopting its climate action plan. In 2019, I then ran for and won a seat on St. Louis Park City Council to implement the plan these students initiated. When this seat opened up a couple of years ago, I saw an opportunity to have a bigger impact on climate policy across Minnesota and represent our community's values in St. Paul. And I have loved the job. I love representing our community, and I love being able to affect issues that the community cares about. Minnesota is having quite a moment now. The work the legislature did in partnership with Governor Walz the past couple of years is being held up as an example for other states and for the federal government. Personally, over the last 2 years, I was lead author on a wide-ranging set of 27 bills that became law, including several climate bills that are nation-leading, and a bill on voter pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. Young people are why I got involved in politics, so although I'm not an education expert and don't serve on an education committee, how we educate our kids is super important to me, and I look forward to the discussion this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Larry. John?
Hello, how are you? Can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Can you hear us, John Nagel?
I
There you are.
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Hi.
I
Yes, we
can,
can,
and now
John.
I can see you and hear you.
Oh, that's even better, isn't it? Hi, how are you? It's a beautiful Saturday in Minnesota. So I'm a Minnesota kid, born and raised here. Went to the University of St. Thomas. Grew up in St. Louis Park, and other than a couple of years here and there, I ended up coming back to St. Louis Park, and I purchased the house that I was raised in, and I raised my two kids here. My daughter actually went to Hopkins many years ago. She's now in her 30s, graduated, has her own home, very successful. So I'm familiar with the Minnesota school system and St. Louis Park and Hopkins. I'm a retired state trooper. I've come out of retirement during the last 13 years. I was a criminal justice chair for a college, and I taught college classes. And I've taught for the Minnesota Safety Council. And then I was also an instructor for the State Patrol for many years. Part of what I did with the State Patrol, I was actually a consultant for the federal government when it came to bike and pedestrian safety issues. So anyway, I've done a lot of stuff over the last 40 years. People say you should only have like a 2-page resume or a 1-page resume. It's really hard to fit 40 years onto that. The reason I'm running is Minnesota has a lot of problems. Now, I agree with Larry. Minnesota is a beautiful place. I have been backpacking and canoeing, and I love Minnesota, and I want to keep it as beautiful as it is. But we have some really big, huge issues, and those issues are with our kids. 50% aren't at math and reading standards, and that troubles me. The money's not getting to the really good teachers. I mean, we have some absolutely fantastic teachers in Minnesota, and they're becoming frustrated. So that's why I got back into it. I just think that, St. Louis Park needs a choice, and I would like to help every Minnesotan, every school child, every teacher, and I'd like to reduce taxes. And that's probably one of the biggest reasons I'm running.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate that. I am going to walk through just a couple of housekeeping things for us. You can see this photo here that some of our student board reps have taken with our Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. This is the high-level overview of what the Hopkins Public Schools Legislative Action Coalition does. We are a nonpartisan advocacy group comprised of school board members, parents, students, and community members. We advocate for education funding and policies at both the state and federal levels. We work closely with district leadership to identify pressing education issues each year and create a legislative platform approved by our school board to represent the district's priorities. We are recognized as a valuable resource for legislators, policymakers, and advocacy groups for research, community connections, and timely advocacy, and partner with the AMSD, MSBA, and neighboring school district advocacy groups to host community events on education, finance, special education, and school safety. We also organize an annual day of advocacy at the Capitol, including individual meetings with our 9 legislators. What you're seeing on the screen now is a map of Hopkins schools. You can see there's 7 cities within the Hopkins public school boundaries. And we have 4 state senators and 5 state representatives. This is a summary of today's schedule. We have already been through our 9, 10, and 11 a.m. Sessions. We're currently in our 1 o'clock, and we'll have 2 more this afternoon. So we appreciate everybody in the community joining us. And I'll go through our guidelines. The LAC does not support or oppose any political party or candidate. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates and not of the LAC or Hopkins Public Schools. The purpose of this forum is to offer an opportunity for voters to hear the candidates discuss important education issues that will affect students and families in our school district and across Minnesota. And Public Schools Legislative Action Coalition is a nonpartisan advocacy group. The guidelines for constituent questions or that the community had the opportunity to submit questions to this forum in advance by email or by scanning a QR code that we pushed out to the community. Questions that are unclear, hostile, or of a personal nature will not be used. Questions that are similar may be combined and summarized by the moderator. And questions may be submitted via chat during our Facebook Live or YouTube Live or on this Zoom recording. And the moderator will treat them as stated above, though only questions related to education will be entertained for the purposes of this forum. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves, which you have already done, and 1 minute for a concluding statement at the end. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question presented by the moderators. The timekeeper will present a running timer to keep track of the 2-minute countdown. The LAC would like to remind these candidates that this is not a debate, so please do not address one another. And the LAC reserves the right to utilize the mute feature if a candidate exceeds the time or does not abide by this format. We will get right into our questions. I believe that Steve Adams is going to kick us off here with question number 1.
Thanks, Jen. The first question is regarding vouchers, and both of you should have received this question in advance. But in recent years, numerous proposals have been made in the legislature to provide public funding for private and religious schools, either directly through vouchers or indirectly through tax credits, tax sheltered accounts, or by routing tuition through tax exempt organizations. So what is your reasoning on, what is your position on providing public funding for non-public schools? And please explain your reasoning. So, Mr. Nagel, you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Steve. I've looked at this, and it is public money, but it's also parents' money. And I think parents have the right to be able to use their tax dollars to send kids to schools that would most benefit what their children's needs are. There are all sorts of studies that show that vouchers actually help lower class income people, people of color. So again, I guess the question is that why haven't we already gone to vouchers in Minnesota? So if we truly are caring about families and children, we would allow that to happen.
Okay, Larry, your response?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. In general, I'm opposed to it. And the Minnesota Constitution seems pretty clear on it, especially relative to public money for religious schools. Article 13, Section 2 says, "In no case shall any public money or property be appropriated or used for the support of schools wherein the distinctive doctrines, creeds, or tenets of any particular Christian or other religious sect are promulgated or taught." Also, the Constitution makes it clear that it's the legislator's responsibility to provide funding for a thorough and efficient system of public school throughout the state. So in general, I'm opposed to public funding for non-public schools, especially if it reduces the amount of funding provided for public schools. I think that's, per the Constitution, our responsibility and charter to do stuff. I could imagine what reasons why the state would want to provide funding for kids and students, regardless of whether they are in public or private schools, counseling, health services, transportation. There's some limited amount that we do already, but this funding shouldn't reduce funding for public education.
Okay, Jen, you want to assign the next question?
Yeah, I want to stop the timer that just suddenly started. Can you see the timer now?
Yeah.
Okay.
The big timer.
Thank you. Okay. If elected, your oath to uphold the Minnesota State Constitution includes the education clause, which reads in part, "The legislature shall make such provisions by taxation or otherwise as will secure a thorough and efficient system of public schools throughout the state." As you are aware, increases in state funding in the state funding formula are not keeping up with inflation and expenses. Consumer price index increases over the last 2 years have ranged from 2.5 to 9.1%. The increase in the formula in 2023 still resulted in deficit spending in some districts, even with the reductions to curb expenses, due in part to many new mandates that came with the funding increase. Do you support an increase in the per pupil formula and removal of the current cap of the 3% on the inflation factor for the per pupil formula? And as a follow-up, do you have additional solutions to secure sound funding for Minnesota public schools? Larry, would you like to go first?
Sure. So I don't support raising the cap. I mean, we just put it in place in 2023. We certainly have had a abnormal inflationary environment over the past, post-COVID, but it's back down under 3%. So I don't support raising that at this time. I do think that while we've made a lot of progress on funding public education, you don't fix really 2 decades of disinvestment in a couple of years. And if really contextually, if you look at what per pupil funding would have been if it just kept pace with inflation over the past 20 years, it would have been about $1,300 more than what it was back in 2023. So we made a big step. My understanding is we closed about a third of the gap, and I definitely think there's more work to do, but I wouldn't support on the inflation adjustment side. But some other things that we did in the cross subsidy and special ed, we've billed about 50% of that. In EL, English language funding, we fund a little bit differently, but that cross subsidy is going away by 2027. So I think we've done a lot there. We do need more investment in support staff, more things to recruit and retain teachers, and some focus especially on equalization of school levies that helps property poor districts. And so I am for more investment in schools. I do want to make a comment. There was a question about a point in this about mandates, and a few points on that. One is, this is a huge portion of the state's budget goes to education. And so part of mandates is accountability. And some of those mandates, one of those that you're talking about was allowing tribal students to wear their regalia in graduation. So we have to get a little more specific on that.
Thank you. John?
Sure. When we look at that, if you actually look at what the law says, the legislature will otherwise secure a thorough and efficient system of public education. And I think it's pretty clear that that's not going on in Minnesota right now. Governor Walz touts of the $2.3 billion or the full funding of the school. Only $1.8 billion is actually making it to the schools. Larry brought up mandates. You have unfunded mandates given to the schools, and the folks that I've talked to, they're going with these mandates. We're now back to zero. So even though they fully funded us with the amount of mandates that the Democratic controlled legislature put on them, they're literally again back to zero. So I think that when we talk about funding, you really need to make sure that you're truly giving the money to the schools, to the teachers, and it's making itself into the school system. Those mandates cost about $1 billion, which are unfunded. So you take a look at the total amount of money that was spent, and then you put another $1 billion on that, forced on them by the legislature and the Department of Education. And what do schools do? Well, they're going to cut staff. And I don't know about you, but my daughter was not only was she in sports, but she was in music. And one of the first things schools do is they start cutting out arts and music and the fun things, the other things that the kids can do. And here's the other thing too. Unfortunately, we have huge mismanagement. Just look at Feeding the Future. Nobody's been held accountable for all of that money that has just been lost. I've not seen anyone in the legislature trying to find out what happened. No one's been held accountable. And then I go back to this. If we need all of these things in education, the legislature has been controlled by one party, and they have not done anything to fix these things. So I think when we look at, that whole funding area, we need to take a look at how we're funding the schools and then what mandates we're putting on them. And I really truly think that it's time that we give this back to the parents and the schools and the principals and the teachers, because there's just simply too many areas where the money is going, and it's not always going to the schools.
Thank you. Okay, question number 3 is about MDE. How does your vision for public education in Minnesota align with the priorities of the Minnesota Department of Education? John, I'll have you go first.
Okay, well, obviously it doesn't go along with our Department of Education at all. The governor has hired some folks, and they're more concerned about social change than they are about math, reading, and English. And when you have an individual talks about overthrowing the government, and that's going to be part of our social studies, that gentleman's name is Brian Lozensky. You can look it up. And they're pushing an ethnic studies. And I think we all know that ethnic studies is not where we're talking about Native Americans or people in Norway. It's really pretty amazing to think that in Minnesota that we could have critical race theory and DEI coming into kindergarten and these lower grades. So I think parents need to realize exactly what's going on with the Department of Education. And right now, far too many activists are trying to determine what should be taught versus our teachers and our parents. So when you have someone who's an appointee by the governor that wants to overthrow the U.S. government, we have some really, really big concerns with that. They hired 170 DEI people in Minnesota. What are those 170 people going to do when 50% of our kids aren't reading or writing? So I think what we need to do is we need to eliminate all of the activists, and we need to get to our principals and our really great teachers and our parents so that we can actually take back Minnesota schools, which are being hijacked right now.
Thank you, Larry.
Yeah, I don't follow a lot of what my colleague there just said. I am aligned with much of what is in the MDE's plan. Here's the kind of things that it talks about. The Due North Education Plan is, sorry, I'm getting some feedback here.
Sorry, that was our timer that we're unfortunately, I think, testing on all of you. I've got your timer running on my clock, and I'll let you know if you're getting close.
Okay.
Larry, thank you. Sorry.
All right. So the education plan is centered on ensuring every child in Minnesota receives a high quality education, no matter their race or zip code, right? And that's really important because if you actually look at the demographics in Minnesota schools, almost 38% are students of color, which is up from 30% in 2016 and 19% in 2003. So, we can do fear mongering about ethnic studies, but what this is making sure that people that kids can relate to the stuff they're being taught and can see themselves in the teachers that are teaching them. So it's trying to be effective in our education. The other things that it does is it talks about expanding early learning opportunities. And I totally believe in that. Studies have shown that it's for every dollar invested in early learning, it's a 16-to-1 return over the course of life of a student. And by the way, children who experience food insecurity early in life are twice as likely as their peers to be identified for special education services and to repeat a grade. Another great reason why things like feeding kids is such a great policy. And a third key point that I want to highlight from their plan is every student learns in a safe and nurturing environment with a focus on mental health supports. Very important, especially coming out of COVID. And Minnesota to date has a very low counselor to student ratio compared to other states. So this is an area that we need some focus on. Another point of the plan is caring and qualified teachers. and expanding opportunities for students of color and Indigenous students. So as I said, I'm aligned in large parts with the direction that MDE is going.
Thank you. I would like to turn to our student board rep, Mia, for a couple of follow-up questions. Mia, will you just take a second to introduce yourself and ask a couple of the questions we've received from the community?
Yeah, of course. Hi, my name is Mia. I'm a senior at Hopkins High School. I really love political science, so I'm actually really happy to be offered this opportunity. For my first question from the community is, schools have changed how they deliver education, but not how they assess students. What are your thoughts on changing how to measure student success?
Larry, why don't you go first?
Okay. Yeah, great question. And I think this highlight, one point I would like to make is test scores are important, but they're absolutely not the only thing. And things like attendance and the environment of the school are really important. Attendance, graduation rates, things along those lines. So, recently there's some information that came out kind of post-COVID of what's going on statewide. And what we're seeing is the test scores haven't really recovered, but attendance rates are starting to go up. And that's really important because you can't educate unless the kids are at school. And the other thing I would say is those test scores don't yet reflect the significant investment we made in literacy with the READ Act. And so initial results that we're hearing from schools that have been out in front and like that have been fantastic. So I look forward to seeing that go up in the future. But I think things like graduation rates for students that decide to go into trades, like how they can are able to do that. I think there are other interesting ways to look at schools. And when a parent goes and looks at a school, it doesn't just look at test scores. It also looks at the environment of that school and the supportiveness of the teachers. So I think we need to be flexible in how we look at schools.
Thank you much, John.
Thank you. Okay, so the next community
Wait, Mia. Wait.
Oh, sorry.
Let's let John respond. All good. John, you're muted.
How's that? We better now? Okay. Nia, hi. My daughter again went to Hopkins. And, when you walked into that school, you immediately did not feel like you were in a high school. What I want to make sure is that every single child, every student, people like Nia, I want them to walk into a school and go, wow, I can accomplish anything I want to today. I want them to feel safe. I want them to feel welcome. And unless we have an atmosphere where the kids can walk in and they're not bullied, and they have teachers that are engaged, and we have parents that are also engaged, that's where we need to be starting with this. I think Nia will tell you there are really great teachers, and there's some really teachers that probably shouldn't be teaching. Now, I have to disagree with grades, because I have a feeling that if Nia gets an A on a report or on a test, I'm guessing she's pretty happy with that. And I'm not sure, again, why the Department of Education and the legislature keeps wanting to eliminate grades, because that's the only measure we really have. With what's going on in the schools, we have national experts that have criticized these new social studies. So when you have 3 people criticizing what's going on in our schools, it's going to be hard for Nina to learn and our other kids to learn. And when the Department of Education hires 3 people to take a look at their new teaching modules, and 2 out of the 3 come out and say, good Lord, don't do this, it's terrible. And yet the Department of Education does it anywhere. So maybe we need to redo the Department of Education so folks like Nina and all of our kids have a better ability to go into a school, feel confident, be happy when they're doing well, have engaged teachers, have engaged parents, and I think they'll have a much, much better experience.
Okay, thank you. And I did not mean to cut you off earlier. You guys both gave amazing responses. For the second question, many Hopkins public schools are unsafe for children to walk or bike to. We know that walking to school has tremendous mental and physical health benefits for students. What will you do to expand the safe routes to schools available for students?
Can I take that one?
Yes, please, John, go ahead.
Okay, so when you're talking about walking to school safely, I mean, are we just talking about being on the bus or walking or biking? You know, when I worked for the federal government, we actually published a bike pedestrian safety class. We taught that all over the nation, and we showed schools and police officers and folks how to make a bicycle-friendly, pedestrian-friendly environment. Now, you know, on the bus, there are certain things that we can do on the bus, whether it's cameras or, you know, bus patrol kids to try to help with that. A big thing, and this was really messed up, we lost our SROs for a while, school resource officers. And I think Nina will tell you, school resource officers can turn into great friends. And it's someone where if a kid's having problems at home, or they're coming from an abusive relationship, or something's bad's happening at school, they can go to those school resource officers and they can confide in them. And when those school resource officers aren't there, those kids lose a great friend, and they lose someone who's going to be able to protect them. We have a problem with law enforcement, that we've decimated our law enforcement community. But, you know, in those areas in the morning, if I were the chief, there would be a patrol car, you know, right there near the school, making sure kids biking and walking were getting there, you know, safely. There'd be enforcement of traffic laws and pedestrian laws, making sure that everybody's looking out for our kids. I used to teach school bus and pedestrian safety and school patrol things. So there's actually a lot of things that we can do. And there again, you know, feeding the future, that scandal of all that money not being there, we could put money into those kinds of resources to help our kids, because we all want our kids to be able to feel safe when they walk into that room. We should probably also talk about reinforcing the schools. The schools need to be better at keeping people from getting into the schools that shouldn't be there. And that's called hardening a school. And there are great ways of doing that.
Thank you, John. I love the Academy Award cutoff music. Larry.
Yeah, thanks. And thank you, Mia, for the question. Safe Routes to Schools is a great program. A good chunk of the money from that comes from federal sources. I think there may be some state matches, but it's the kind of thing that we should increase investment in. And beyond that, we need to make it easier for people and kids to get around without needing to use a car. And in St. Louis Park, what I championed while I was on city council, and I do now that I'm in the state legislature, is that really strong active transportation infrastructure, bike and pedestrian. And when you're talking bikes, what you really need is protected bike lanes, not just painted bike lanes. You need stuff where you can feel comfortable sending your 10, 12-year-old out on their bike, and they have a nice, easy path to get to school. So one of the things that we did do was we, through some work in a small amount of sales tax in the metro area, there's funds dedicated to active transportation now, so that hopefully that can help with things like safe routes to school. I do want to comment on safety in schools. I think that what we really need to focus on is not, yes, our schools absolutely need to be safe, but getting to a hardening of schools, making them feel like, you know, why are we doing that, right? Because we have too many guns in society. So if you really want to make schools safer, we need to attack the issue of gun violence prevention.
Thank you so much. Mia, do you have one last question from our community that you'd like to ask?
Yes. Okay. For the last question, Minnesota is one of 8 states that provides free school meals for students. In all of these states, the program is more popular than expected and more families are participating. When we add inflationary costs for food and delivery, all 8 states are over budget. How can Minnesota increase and stabilize future funding to feed students?
I think this is
Larry,
mine
I'll have
first.
you
Is
go.
that right, Mia?
Yep, I'll have you go first. Thanks.
Yeah. So this is a great program. This is a values point, right? Feeding kids is just so important because hungry kids can't learn, and stigmatized kids, if they have a special ticket or things like that, can't learn. One of the other great reasons that this type of program is that very often what you would find in the previously is that a family may not have qualified for the free school meals program that existed because they made just a little bit too much, and then they would hit some kind of emergency situation in their lives and lose some income, and then they would fall under that line, but they wouldn't be, there's so much else going on, they wouldn't be aware of it, and so their kids wouldn't have food, or it would really impact them even more. So making it sort of a baseline level, like, hey, we provide desks at school, we provide meals at school. It makes it administratively easier, and it's just a values thing that our kids are never going to be hungry. Now, so as a values thing, we did see that the program was more successful than forecast. That means that more kids are eating and more families are getting some money back in their pocketbooks because they're not having to pay for school lunches. I think that's a good thing, and I think it's that we need to fund that within our budget. And right now, as things are trending, it appears that a surplus is coming for next session. We'll see how it pans out, but I think this is one of those important things that when it comes to our kids and education that we need to do. I also want to comment about the Feeding Our Future stuff. It's horrible when someone defrauds the government. That should not happen. That program was put in place in a bipartisan fashion during a tough time of COVID by a Democratic House and a Republican Senate. And then we absolutely should hold people accountable to that.
Thank you, Larry. John?
Hi, Nina. I think feeding the kids is a fantastic idea. When my kids were going to school, every now and then, you could actually send money to the school saying, hey, just apply this to some kid that needs money, and that didn't seem to be a problem. If we just lowered our taxes so people had more money in their pocket, parents would be able to not have to make a choice between feeding their kids or paying the electric bill. And Minnesota is totally overtaxed. I'd take 160 DEI people that we just hired, and I would unhire them, and I would apply that money to feeding our kids. We have all sorts of areas where we could take money out. Now, the problem with feeding our kids is that it went to everybody. It didn't make any difference what your income was. So, someone with a very large income was saying, why am I getting these cards? They actually returned them. Now, if we would have not given that money to everybody, and if the legislature would have done their homework, and we would have actually targeted the kids that truly need it, which could have been done through the schools, we wouldn't have a problem. Now that money, the way we're doing it right now, we're going to have to fix it because it's not sustainable. And as far as Larry talking about a surplus, the way they have spent money, going through the billions of dollars, we are going to have a shortfall in about a year and a half, and Larry knows it. And when we have that shortfall, what are they going to start cutting? So my idea is that, yes, I want to feed every single little kid that comes to school hungry. But I also want to lower taxes, and I want to create jobs, and I want to make sure that parents have the pride and the ability to afford to send their kids to a public school and not be hungry. So a lot of the mess that we have is because nobody's doing anything about it. We can't continue to raise taxes. So yeah, do I want to feed every kid? I do, but I want to feed the kids that need it. I don't want money going to high income.
Thank you both. I am going to give each of you 1 minute to make some closing statements. And so, John, I will have you go first.
Sure. Larry brought up guns. Just recently, there was a 10-year-old that got into a car and was driving it through a playground. Now, we can blame guns all the time. When I talk about hardening a school, I'm talking about egress and entrances and making sure that when the kids come in, no one is able to get into that school that doesn't belong to it. We're not talking about turning them into a castle. We're talking about again, a safe environment. And I think if we told Nina that she could go to school and not worry about any kind of a mass incident, I think she'd be really happy. Now, you can take a car and you can run it through a playground. We just saw that. Fortunately, none of the kids were hurt. So I want to make the school safe, and you're going to make the school safe by putting money into the schools. And again, how can you give the schools that much money and then give them all of these mandates and have that much money? And I want to go back to this too. And I think people need to understand this. This is from an article, and I'm going to be very brief. Walsh's agency. Well, I got just cut off. So we just want to make things better.
Thank you, John. Larry?
That's right.
Thank you so much to the Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition. There is little that is more important than how we educate our kids. I think you heard two very different visions here of what we think that should look like. What I'm talking about is addressing a 2-decade disinvestment in public education. We made some great progress in these past 2 years, but there's more to do. And we must also invest in early childhood education. There's a 16-to-1 return for every dollar invested. Strong public schools are the bedrock of our community and economy, and every single Minnesota child, regardless of where they live or the color of their skin, deserves a high-quality public education. I am proud of the work we did these past 2 years of investing in schools, putting accountability measures in place, and I'm excited to do more, and I ask for your vote.
Thank you. The music. Okay, the Hopkins LAC would like to thank you both for your time today and for your interest in education issues. The LAC members, along with your constituents, enjoy learning more about your priorities for education funding and policies that will affect the future of Minnesota students. We appreciate your candidacy and wish you the best of luck in the November 5th elections.
Thank you for being here today, everyone. We will get started on this virtual candidate forum. Welcome. This is our annual forum not always annual, candidate forum that we host very often with the Legislative Action Coalition in Hopkins. Thank you for joining us on this busy and beautiful Saturday in the midst of campaign season. I know you all are out and about in the community and doing lots of work. So we appreciate you taking the time to be here with us and to talk about education. So my name is Shannon Andreessen. I am a member of the Hopkins School Board and also a long-term member of the Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition. And I am hosting this with my fellow board member, Brooke Roper, and one of our student board representatives on the school board, Mia Osman, will be asking some questions that have come in from the community. And we would then like to welcome our candidates for District 46B who have joined us here this evening. Hello to Cheryl Youakim and to Kim Rich. We would like to, at this point, give you each 2 minutes to introduce yourself and your campaign. First, we will go with Cheryl Youakim.
Thank you, and thank you for hosting this today. Hopkins LAC is where I got one of my starts in politics, so it feels like coming home. I'm Cheryl Youakim, and I represent portions of Hopkins, all of Hopkins, 2 little precincts in St. Louis Park, and about a quarter of Edina, which joined our district 2 years ago. Some of you may have seen me subbing in our schools, either as a paraprofessional or a short call sub teacher in Hopkins, Edina, and St. Louis Park. I try to do that during the interim. Hopkins is where my husband and I bought a house over 27 years ago to raise our 3 kids, which house feels a little bit empty now that they're all graduated from Hopkins schools and launched their careers after college. Many of you have also heard my origin story, entering into politics, advocating for early childhood education, and then joining the Hopkins LAC to advocate for E through 12, the Hopkins Human Rights Commission, as well as the City Council, and then being elected to the Minnesota House in 2014. I got involved in politics because I was passionate about an issue, E through 12 funding. I ran for City Council to better connect people with the government that serves them. And I ran for House to bring that experience up to the state capitol at that level for our communities. I'm socially liberal, approach fiscal issues with a thoughtful and practical eye, and I know how to work across the aisle to get things done. Despite our polarized climate, I believe that we share so much in common. I've heard that from many folks through emails, phone calls, attendance at the community conversations I host during session, town halls that we host before and after, talking with folks at their doors. And I want to thank you all for your shared concerns, hopes, and dreams for your families, businesses, and community. I look forward to our conversation today and to earning your vote on November 5th. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. And I just wanted to let everyone know that we do have a timer running. If you can see, it is on the tile for Rachel Hartland, right above her head, so that you know how much time you have left. And now I would like to turn it over to Kim Rich for your 2-minute intro. Thank you.
Hi. My name is Kim Rich. I'm a retired entrepreneur and business owner. I've held real estate and insurance licenses here in Minnesota, and I've lived in Edina since 1999. We moved here from Plymouth and wanted to be close to Southdale, where my wife and I both worked, and we met there and settled here. So my platform is public safety. I want to make sure that the police have all the resources they need to do their jobs. And education, we want to make sure that the budgeted money is actually making its way into the classroom. And accountability for all the taxing and spending. And I've realized that representation is listening. And I listened when I knocked on doors, and I heard the mother of a 9th grader explain that there were 47 students in her Hopkins 9th grade class. And there, 3 doors down from her was a teacher who just got laid off. And a grandmother of another 9th grader who doesn't have a teacher in the class at all. They're just writing the assignment on the board and expecting the students to figure it out. So these kinds of instances don't seem to agree with me. I'm not going to, I would never agree with that it has to be changed. And I grew up with modular scheduling. Nobody probably knows about that, but in the 70s, that was an experiment that was done. And I think they're experimenting today with children. So thank you.
That's our lovely Oscar music playing you off. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. Now I'd just like to take a little bit of time to introduce the LAC, Hopkins School District, and also give some framing about the candidate forum itself. So this is the Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition, or candidate forum. We do it regularly and really enjoy the relationships that it builds. You can see that we are very student focused, and so these are some of our students that are prior members of the LAC with our current Lieutenant Governor. So what we do as an LAC, first and foremost, we are a nonpartisan advocacy group centered around education and what we need to do for public education in the Hopkins School District. We're comprised of school board members, parents, students, and community members. We advocate for education funding and policies at both the state and the federal level. And to do this, we work closely with district leadership to identify the pressing educational issues each year that are affecting our district in particular. We then create a legislative platform that is approved by the school board to represent our priorities. And we take that to all of our legislators who represent the district. We are recognized as a valuable resource for legislators, policymakers, and advocacy groups for research, community connections, and timely advocacy. We do this also through partnership with AMSD, which is the Association of Metropolitan School Districts, and MSBA, which is the Minnesota School Board Association. We partner also with neighboring school districts, and we host community events on education finance, special education, and school safety. We also organize an annual day of advocacy at the Capitol, which includes individual meetings with our 9 legislators. This is a map of Hopkins Public Schools, so you will see why you were invited here today and why we have quite a few sessions. We have 9 legislators across our district, and we serve different municipalities that touch on our district. So here we'll see the schedule. We have completed 4 of our sessions. We are in the 2 p.m. House District 46B, and we have 1 more that will wrap up today's candidate forum. Some guidelines that we go through that are important to know. We do not support or oppose any political party or candidate. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates and not of the LAC or Hopkins Public Schools. The purpose of this forum is to offer an opportunity for voters to hear the candidates discuss important education issues that will affect students and families in our school district and across the state. The Public Schools Legislative Action Coalition, again, is a nonpartisan advocacy group. We have guidelines for the questions that are submitted. Everyone in the community had an opportunity to submit questions in advance. If any questions are unclear, hostile, or of a personal nature, they will not be used. Questions that are similar may be combined and summarized by the moderator. And questions can also be submitted right now via chat during our YouTube live event. The moderator will treat them as stated above, though only questions related to education will be entertained for the purposes of this forum. So our format is each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves, which you've already done, thank you, and 1 minute for a concluding statement. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question presented by the moderator. And a timekeeper will present a running timer to keep track of the 2-minute countdown. So keep your eye on that. Of course, you will get the beautiful music at the end. And we would like to remind candidates that this is not a debate. Please do not address one another. And the LAC reserves the right to utilize the mute feature if a candidate exceeds the time or does not abide by this format. So with all of that out of the way, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Brooke Roper, to ask the questions that were provided to the candidates in advance of this forum.
Thank you so much, Shannon, and thank you both for being here today. Looking forward to listening to you both. So question number 1 is, in recent years, numerous proposals have been made in the legislature to provide public funding for private and religious schools, either directly through vouchers or indirectly through tax credits, tax shelter accounts, or by routing tuition through tax-exempt organizations. What is your position on providing public funding for non-public schools? Please explain your reasoning. and either candidate can go.
Cheryl, why don't you take this one first?
Right. Are we just going to alternate then, or?
Yes.
Got it. So I am opposed to private school vouchers and for tax credits and running them through outside entities for many different reasons. But one is that we haven't kept up pace with inflation for our public schools. And right in our state constitution, it's one of the two things we're required to fund as a public form of education. And until we have them kept up with inflation and more stabilized, I don't want to entertain that concept. And then also we have open enrollment and charter schools. So we have a lot of parent choice that is already out there. And we also currently have a K through 12 tax credit that we just increased the income level for and the amount that can be spent.
Thank you, Kim.
Vouchers absolutely are not supported by Democrats. They currently have a stranglehold on the public schools, and the Democrats seem to want to do anything they can to avoid any competition, even at the expense of students and parents. This is why there's an exodus from the public schools in every city in our district. Competition is important. It makes us strive to be our best. Under Governor Walz, the literacy rates have fallen by 16%. In the past 4 years of full Democratic control, the state has taken away decision-making power from local educators, school boards, and cut parents out. After passing the largest education budget in history, we have overcrowded classrooms, fewer teachers, and our students suffer the consequences. Democrats included in their record-setting education budget more than 65 new mandates on schools. Many of them were unfunded and unnecessary, forcing districts to cut their budgets in order to comply at the expense of the students. Democrats fail to understand the real reason for the mass exodus from public schools. They'll argue the reason for parents to leave a school is for religious reasons, and to some degree it is. However, the lion's share of parents leaving public schools would actually stay if they were not shut out, if their children were not being indoctrinated. If citizens hope to get better public schools, they must consider how they vote this year. Will voters expect a different result from the Democrat incumbents? It's not too late to look at a better future by electing new leadership. I am in favor of vouchers.
Thank you. Our next question has to do with funding.
Okay, so if elected, your oath to uphold the Minnesota State Constitution includes the Education Clause, which reads in part, the legislator shall make such provisions by taxation or otherwise as will secure a thorough and efficient system of public schools throughout the state. As you're aware, increases in the state funding formula are not keeping up with inflation and expenses. Consumer price index increases over the last 2 years have ranged from 2.5% to 9.1%. The increase in the formula in 2023 still resulted in deficit spending, and some districts even with reductions to curb expenses, due in part to many new mandates that came with funding increase. Do you support an increase in the per pupil formula and removal of the current cap of 3% on the inflation factor for the per pupil formula? Do you have any additional solutions to secure sound funding for Minnesota public schools?
Will be you, Mr. Rich, going first on this one.
Okay, thank you. Nothing can keep up with high inflation. Every member of the Democrat trifecta have taken this oath and failed. They've had full control during one of the most prosperous times in Minnesota history. Full control during a time of less than 2% inflation, which was lower than the Federal Reserve goal of 2%. It's funny how Democrats blame their deficit spending on inflation. Democrat spending would have been a deficit spending without inflation. Let's say we triple the formula to 9.1%, and inflation drops as suddenly as it increased. Would that be tax gouging? The trifecta eclipsed everyone's expectation of Democrat spending. They had nearly $18 billion in surplus to spend, which they did. They raised taxes and they based the next budget as though another surplus was on the way. And the kids, what happens to the kids when leaders spend every dime they have and leave the classrooms out? Because parents see their kids indoctrinated with these racist policies. The MDE is actually trying to incorporate these policies into math and science. This is not education. This is not learning to read and do math and do science. It simply doesn't matter how much money we throw at it. We could get a lot more bang for the buck by getting back to the basics, even cutting budgets and making them leaner and more efficient. I don't really fall in line with the current policies of the MDE. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Youakim, your response to the question on funding?
Yeah, it's hard to talk about education funding in 2 minutes since the formula is complicated, but we did have a $17 billion surplus. $12 billion of it was one-time money, and one-time money in schools does not fare well. And I think a lot of us know that. You don't want to hire teachers with one-time money. I'm proud that we led the charge in trying to fill the gaps of 20 years of underfunding, even though we got to spend $2.2 billion above the base, which, by the way, school districts, we spend 38% of our state general fund on our education system, and that's how seriously we take it. But we got to spend $2.2 billion above the base, but we've only filled about a third of the hole. I was very proud to fight for indexing the formula to inflation, because you all know in the last 20 years, there were 4 years of 0% increases. That compounding interest is hard to climb out of. We picked a 2% base because we were looking at when you do the 2% the first year, it goes in 2%, it rolls into the base, and then 2% on top of that. So for the biennium, it would be a 6% increase. The 3% cap was because it's fiscally prudent. Inflation over the last 40 years has only gone over 3%, 4 or 5 times. So if inflation sticks where it is right now at 2.5%, you'll get 2.5% when we set the next state budget in the next year. And that doesn't preclude you from coming back and explaining, hey, we still haven't filled the hole. We still need more to do. And that's what leads me to answering the second part of the question is conversations with our school districts to see what their needs are, making sure we're understanding that schools are different across the entire state. And you can see that with the READ Act when we came back and moved money forward and then put more money into training to make sure that our schools could utilize that and get everybody ready to raise those literacy scores.
Thank you, Representative Youakim. Now our third and final question that was submitted to the candidates beforehand is about MDE.
So, how does your vision for public education in Minnesota align with the priorities of the Minnesota Department of Education, MDE?
That's a good question. I had to look back and look at the Due North plan because it hopefully will be updated this year. We passed so much of it last year, from updating the social studies standards to increasing funding for our mental health support staff, for increasing funding for teacher recruitment retention, as well as money into Youth Prize for those after-school activities, $10 million in the base, so base funding for full-service community schools, which we haven't had before, universal meals, and the list goes on and on what we tried to do. But like I said, we know that 20 years of underfunding can't be turned around overnight. We still have about a third of a hole to fill, and waiting to see what the updated plan looks like. But I know, speaking with MDE and speaking with districts across the state, one of the things where I'm going to start even focusing more on is the absenteeism. This last session, with some of our one-time money, we started 12 absenteeism pilot projects across the state, plus a task force to look at it. And we can't wait to get some of those from the pilot program to get some of their ideas back and what they're trying to do to see what works and see how we can implement something statewide or provide some funds for districts. Also, we have a lot of districts with declining enrollment, and we have a provision in the categoricals to ease that declining enrollment. But people just aren't having as many babies anymore. So that's something we'll have to look at as well. And then, of course, continuing that investment in the READ Act. It already is showing that it's working in some of our districts that have done it early on. There's Monroe Elementary in Brooklyn Park, for instance. They got their teachers trained and started at the ground running 2 years ago. They saw their literacy rates go from 45% to 90% in 2 years. So we're going to keep an eye on that and keep talking to our districts to see what they need to implement that, and then move on to numeracy and a few other areas.
Thank you. Your turn, Mr. Rich.
Thank you. I'm quite skeptical of the MDE with the millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in fraud, which they oversee. The Democrats will blame the bad actors on the whole scandal, but the truth was they kept on funding these bad actors well after they knew there was something wrong in that system. And when there's hundreds of millions of dollars going away like that, and I keep hearing about holes to fill, where's all this money going? I don't know why any citizens aren't asking that question. One of the controversies regarding our governor is his number of trips to China. Democrats insist his visits are innocent, as though he was a tourist, which isn't really the case. We learned in the debate that he was claiming to be.
I'm sorry, Mr. Rich. We are asking about your positions on educational issues.
Okay.
In particular, how you align with MDE.
Yeah. All right.
Stay on topic.
I will align as well as I can. If I were to be elected, I will be certainly open to all people that would come to me for help. And I know that the school districts need a lot of help, and the Minnesota Department of Education has a lot of control over the purse strings. So I come from a business background. It's a whole different perspective than my opponent. And I couldn't run my business the way the state is running their business. And so there's, I would say, a lot of holes to fill, and or stop these holes from being there, and we need to be accountable. So if voters want to explore that idea, they can look to themselves to see if they're happy. If they're happy, they vote for Cheryl. If they're not happy,
thank you.
Yep,
I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're going to take this opportunity to welcome one of our student board reps, Mia Osman, to ask community questions that have come
in. Okay. Hi, my name is Mia Osman. I'm a senior at Hopkins High School. I serve on the student board. I hope to major in political science and become a politician, so I'm really happy to have this opportunity. My first question is, schools have changed how they deliver education, but not how they assess students. What are your thoughts on changing how to measure student success?
I didn't hear that.
And we'll have Mr. Rich. You can go first on this one. Thank you.
Can you repeat the question?
Mia, are you able to repeat the question, or would you like me to do that?
I can repeat it. Schools have changed how they deliver education, but not how they assess students. What are your thoughts on changing how to measure student success? Did you guys hear that one?
I heard that, yes. So what you're talking about is not using a grade format where you're not going to grade the students on their tests. They're just achieving a certain level or whatever. I don't know how you're doing that, but you know, I don't know that a lot of colleges are looking at those types of assessments so that it's going to inhibit your ability to find a good college if you try to change those things. And so at this point in time, if you're just looking to do an experiment, I would say no to that. But if you actually know that this is a valid way to measure a student's ability, we can talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Youakim.
Thank you. First, I want to compliment Hopkins Schools on your creative use of online schooling and your hybrid model. I think it's really a great idea to have the kids come in a few days a week if they're hybrid, to have that socialization and the ability to touch base and have some of those wraparound services. So I think that's what you kind of mean by we've gotten creative about changing the way we deliver. I was kind of hoping we could take a breath and do even better after COVID. I think we missed the boat a tiny bit on figuring out a different way of delivering the education system because it's not working for everybody. As for measuring student success, we have a lot of requirements that come to us for the federal money, and the state picks one test that the federal government looks at through ESSA, and that we've decided is our Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment. We also, though, are an opt-out state where parents can opt out of taking that assessment. And sometimes that can kind of really skew the grades in certain schools, but it's still an important test for us to see. And it's a way to hold our schools accountable for teaching to the standards and the graduation requirements we set. But we did just get rid of the above and below level grade level questions with that. So it would tighten it up, because really the assessments come in the classroom. They come with the teachers' formative and summative assessments as kids are going through, oops, got a little dark there. As kids are going through the class, but then also the ability to do map testing frequently during the year, so teachers can see where the students' holes are and what they need to address when they're in class. So there's a variety of ways, and a lot of that's left up to local control.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. For the next question, I'm gonna give it to another student. Her name is Evelyn. She's a freshman and she also goes to the Hopkins High School. So take it away.
Many Hopkins public schools are unsafe for children to walk or bike to. We know that walking to school has tremendous mental and physical health benefits for students. What will you do to expand the safe routes to school available for students?
And Representative Youakim, if you want to take this one first.
Yes, I think Safe Routes to School is a wonderful program. It's funded through our transportation budget, and I see it in action when our kids went to school here. We were about 4 blocks away from Alice Smith Elementary and 2 streets away from a busier street, where I think Hopkins used some of their Safe Routes to School money to put flags on flags in one bucket that the kid could take across so people could see them in our school safety program. We just added on a requirement. I know it's a requirement again to the schools, but you train for bus safety. We're asking you to also train for bike safety, and we put extra money into that Safe Routes to Schools for districts to be able to do that. I think promoting activeness early on with our kids and having the ability to find different ways for kids to get to school is a great idea, and I think it's really flexible and helpful for parents too.
Thank you. Mr. Rich?
Thank you. The SROs, I think they were there in all of our districts at one point, but they were discontinued at some point, and now they're talking about bringing them back. So the increase of...
Evelyn, do you want to repeat the question? This is about safe routes to schools.
Okay. Well, I think they've
Can you go ahead and repeat the question for Mr. Rich?
The question is, many Hopkins public schools are unsafe for children to walk or bike to. We know that walking to school has tremendous mental and physical health benefits for students. What will you do to expand the safe routes to school available for students?
Well, we want to increase the continuity of sidewalks in Hopkins, work with access. so that students have safe place to walk. We used to have school patrols when I was a kid, so that the kids would cross the street and they were well marked and adorned with a lot of reflective material so that they were safely seen by all the drivers in the neighborhood. Obviously, they need to be coached about walking around school buses where they are, the visibility's low and bus drivers have a hard time seeing people. So, being safe is on the students as well. They need to be able to be aware of their surroundings at all times so that they're keeping themselves out of harm's way. So I think that there's a way to make sure that we get a safe route to schools. And that's definitely something we'd look at. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Next question, Mia.
Okay, thank you both for answering, and thank you, Evelyn, for asking that question. The next question is, Minnesota is one of 8 states that provides free school meals for students. In all of these states, the program is more popular than expected and more families are participating. When we add inflationary costs for food and deliveries, all 8 states are over budget. How can Minnesota increase and stabilize future funding to feed students?
And Mr. Rich, if you want to take that one first.
Well, I think that the last measure that was adopted is feeding students that really don't have any need for funding to be fed. They're feeding all the students in the state, which quite a few of them are not really in any peril of hunger. And so this seems to be a waste of dollars going to people. My parents, we had a lunch ticket, and my father had to pay for a lunch ticket every week for me, or else I could brown bag it. And so this focus on the need to be fed all the time is, they're not that we don't want to feed our kids, we do. Everybody needs to be fed, and there are some people that need help with that, and there should be plenty of funding for that, and we can look at that, but just the students that need it rather than everyone included. It's foolish to spend money like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Youakim.
Yes, I'm proud to say that I think we're actually number 14 now on universal meals. And one of the issues and one of the conscious decisions we made was that when you draw a line, there's always winners and losers. And there's some kids that could really use that money or use that lunch because their parents were just above the line and couldn't make it. And one of the reasons why we didn't look at just lifting the line a little bit further was the fact that we don't look at a kid when they come to school and say, okay, what do your parents make? We want to decide that before we give you a textbook or before we give you a desk to sit at, because that's essential for learning, and so is food. It's really hard for a kiddo to be hungry and learn how to do math. It also made it a little bit easier for school districts. We're still trying to figure out and fine tune the forms. We did realize during COVID that direct certification was a lot easier than expected. So that has come into play, but we still have under about 20% where we're still trying to figure out how to make sure we're maximizing the federal dollars. And that's important. We wrote this bill to maximize the federal dollars coming in. So we also have to make sure our federal government continues to fund the program. There has been talk about discontinuing that by some members of Congress. And then as well as when we wrote it, we included it into base funding and into our forecast model. And it's a reimbursement system. And our nutritionists are amazing at figuring out how much food they need. And there's very little waste. And they got the sharing tables. So the amount coming to the schools increases as the reimbursement adds because we have it in the forecast model. So you true up the forecast at the end of the second year in your budget bill, so that money will always be there unless somebody comes in and decides the program's not worth it and they take it away.
Thank you so much, and thank you to both candidates for addressing those questions that were submitted by the public. We now have time for your closing statements. You each have 1 minute. I cannot remember who went first on the opening statement. Was it okay. So, Mr. Rich, you are welcome to go first on the closing statement. You get 1 minute.
Thank you. The Democrats will tell you they have made great strides and improvements and that they still have more to do. And but the statistics will speak for themselves. Scores are down and parents are pulling their kids out of the public schools. There's a famous Democrat who's made this point that the national reviewers selected by Governor Tim Walz's own agency were severely critical of the draft K through 12 social studies standards recently approved by the administrative law judge. And this department is, they're experts on, and they're highly critical of Minnesota's social studies standards. So I believe there's a different approach to our education. And rather than going with experiment, we go with a new approach, with a business approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Youakim, your closing statement.
So it's really been an honor to serve Hopkins, St. Louis Park, and Edina in the legislature, and I hope to earn your vote on or before November 5th so that we continue the good work that we started together. I'm hearing from folks all over. Education is one of the top priorities and always has been for this Senate district. And the emails and the conversations I've had at the door has not changed, with that being one of the top number one. But folks also want an economy that works for everyone. Of course, quality education for our youngest learners, to those preparing for a career in college, access to affordable childcare, money in long-term care to protect women's reproductive choice, investments and reform in community public safety to feel protected and supported, sensible gun control, dependable transportation system, affordable housing, and the list goes on, and to protect our environment as well as your rights. I will always stand for your rights to love who you love, worship how you choose, and to equal protection under the law. I'm socially liberal, fiscally practical, and get things done. And despite what seems like a polarized environment, I think we can all work across the aisle on one common goal, and that's taking care of our kids.
Thank you. I really appreciate both of you taking the time to be here and for your interest in education issues. The LAC members, along with your constituents, enjoy learning more about your priorities for education funding and policies that will affect the future of Minnesota students. We appreciate your candidacy and wish you the best of luck in the November elections. Thank you so much for being here. Hello, welcome everybody to the Hopkins LAC Virtual Candidate Forum 2024. Thank you all for joining us on a busy and beautiful Saturday. In the midst of campaign season, I know that it's a busy time, and just wanted everyone to know that we are welcoming a candidate for House District 49A. This is our last session of the forum, and we were confirmed to hear from both candidates, Stacy Battison and Alex Falconer. We just learned that Alex is not feeling well, has been sick for a while, so is unable to attend the forum today at this time. So we are happy to continue the forum with Stacy, who is here in the virtual space with us. So we would like to, at this time, Ms. Battison, let you take 2 minutes to introduce yourself and your campaign.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you everyone for being here. My name is Stacy Battison. I've been a resident of District 49A for 15 years. I'm a single mother of 3 children. I'm a lawyer, and I'm also the owner of a small PR agency. Very shortly after I announced my candidacy for Minnesota House in April, I asked to meet with all 3 superintendents separately in our district to listen and learn about what challenges schools face and why children's test scores are dropping year after year. And I want to be very clear that nothing I say today is an indictment of our teachers, principals, administrators, and staff. We have gifted and dedicated people teaching and guiding our children. And I'm grateful to anyone who enters the profession of educating our kids. But with only 50% of children reading and able to perform math at state level standards, we have a real problem. Minnesota is now ranked 19th in the nation, and we used to be ranked 5th. Keep in mind, our district's current representative of 8 years, Lori Pryor, chaired the House Education Policy Committee, and it's under her leadership that proficiency in reading and math has so precipitously dropped. Now, we can only blame COVID for so long for falling test scores. In Minnesota, the proportion of students meeting state proficiency standards remains far below pre-pandemic levels, but yet students in Alabama and elsewhere have returned to pre-pandemic achievement levels in math and other states in reading. So Lori Pryor, in her role as chair of the House Education Policy Committee, is on record saying, and I quote, "We know that this is going to make it hard for principals and administrators." But my question is, why is she and other Democrats voting for oppressive and financially unsustainable mandates that are going to make it hard for principals and administrators? We all want our children to be happy and healthy and productive members of society. But for so many Minnesota kids, their future is being cut off at the knees before they are even out of middle school. And I am committed to addressing this problem, learning about it, and learning what we can do to help Minnesota kids succeed.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that introduction. Now we'll just take a few minutes to introduce ourselves, the Legislative Action Coalition, and also to talk about the guidelines and this candidate forum in particular. You'll see here in our opening slide kind of what we do here at Hopkins, which is center student experience and voice. These are student members of the LAC meeting with our now Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, and they did this as members of the LAC here in Hopkins. And what we do is the Legislative Action Coalition is a nonpartisan advocacy group. It is comprised of school board members, parents, students, and community members who are passionate about public education. We advocate for education funding and policy at both the state and federal levels. To do this, we work closely with our district leadership to identify pressing educational issues each year. Through that work, we create a legislative platform that is approved by the school board and represents the district's priorities. We are recognized as a valuable resource for legislators, policymakers, and advocacy groups for research, community connections, and timely advocacy. We do that also through partnering with the Association of Metropolitan School Districts and the Minnesota State School Boards Association. We also partner with our neighboring school districts advocacy groups to host community events on education finance, special education, and school safety. And finally, one of our biggest days of action is an annual day of advocacy at the Capitol, including individual meetings with our 9 legislators that represent the district. You will see here that the Hopkins School District is a little bit unique in that we cover many municipalities, and thus we have a lot of representatives who work with us at the legislature. We have 9. And that it gives us the opportunity to really have a big impact across the legislature and to build lots of relationships. Today's schedule, we are on our final session. We break them out into each House and Senate district so that all candidates can get the same questions and our community members can hear the candidates that they will be voting for. The forum guidelines are as follows. We do not support or oppose any political party or candidate. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates and not of the LAC or Hopkins Public Schools. And the purpose of this forum is to offer an opportunity for voters to hear the candidates discuss important education issues that will affect students and families in our school district and across Minnesota. The Public Schools Legislative Action Coalition is a nonpartisan advocacy group. Guidelines for constituent questions. The community had an opportunity to submit questions in advance of today's forum. If any questions are unclear, hostile, or of a personal nature, they will not be used. And questions that are similar may be combined and summarized by the moderator. Questions may be submitted via chat during our YouTube live event, and the moderator will treat them as stated above, though only questions related to education will be entertained for the purposes of this forum. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves and 1 minute for a concluding statement. We've already done the introduction. And then each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question that's presented by the moderator. A timekeeper will present a running timer, although I'm not sure we're gonna stick quite closely to that as we needed to in other sessions. And the LAC would like to remind candidates that this is not a debate, and we reserve the right to utilize the mute feature if a candidate exceeds the time or does not abide by this format. So I hope all of that is clear. And we've gotten through all of the housekeeping bits. So now to the fun part. My co-hosts today are Tim and Brooke, and they will be asking the questions that were given to the candidates before the forum. So these are questions that the candidates had an opportunity to prepare their response. So I will turn it over to Kim to ask the first question on vouchers.
All right, great. Thanks for joining us today. In recent years, numerous proposals have been made in the legislature to provide public funding for private and religious schools, either directly through vouchers or indirectly through tax credits, tax sheltered accounts, or by routing tuition through tax-exempt organizations. What is your position in providing public funding for non-public schools? Please explain your reasoning.
Sure, thank you so much. Well, I have always been a supporter of public schools, and my views on this changed during the pandemic, to be honest, when I saw parents begging classes to be held in person. When Walls ordered the shutdown, my greatest concern was the kids who were going to fall through the cracks, where school is their safe place and where they get, meals and, mentorship and teacher support. And I publicly said at that time, this is a grave situation, and I'm concerned about children. There was a large exodus from public schools at that time. And while private and charter school enrollment went up, and these weren't all wealthy families. It wasn't only religious schools which saw an enrollment increase. Homeschooling also has gone up dramatically. Some of the issues that I've been hearing that parents are concerned about with public education when I'm knocking on doors and talking to voters are falling test scores and schools not teaching the basics, districts keeping personal information about students from their parents, this sort of thing. And so I generally am in favor of some sort of system where given that our current education transfer system basically allows students to move from district to district, this amounts as a voucher, and I would certainly favor some sort of system that we can come up with that a formula that attributes fixed costs of a student, and that leaves that money with the home district, but then the variable costs that they would go wherever the student goes, as long as that school is making adequate yearly progress.
That's a beautiful Oscar Awards music for the end of time.
That was unexpected yet lovely.
Right? Thank you. Our next question has to do with funding, and that will be Brooke Roper.
Hello, Stacy. So I'm Brooke Roper. I'm a member of the Hopkins School Board, and I want to ask you the second question. So if elected, your oath to uphold the Minnesota State Constitution includes the Education Clause, which reads in part, the legislator shall make such provisions by taxation or otherwise will secure a thorough and efficient system of public schools throughout the state. As you are aware, increase in the state funding formula are not keeping up with inflation and expenses. Consumer price index increases over the last 2 years have ranged from 2.5% to 9.1%. The increase in the formula in 2023 still resulted in deficit spending in some districts, even with reductions to curb expenses, due in part to many mandates that came with the funding increase. Do you support an increase in the per pupil formula and removal of the current cap of 3% on the inflation factor for the per pupil formula? Do you have any additional solutions to secure sound funding for Minnesota public schools?
So thank you for the question. And I will be very honest with you on this question and the answer that I believe is true, which is we had the largest funding for education in the last biennium, and yet the answer to the question of whether schools are fully funded or adequately funded is we really don't know. And I as a candidate don't know. This education funding is a very complex topic, and I am really still learning about all of the things that go into education funding. So I just preface my response with that. I don't know. So I don't know the answer to the question. But first, we must ensure that the funding provided to schools does not come with unfunded mandates that force school districts to put allocated money in places other than the classroom. So individual school districts, with the help of school boards, administrators, teachers, and parents, know best how to meet the needs of families, teachers, kids, and the staff in their district. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing that I would say too, that goes to this funding issue, is we need to examine what exactly is needed for special education funding. We need to determine whether there are gaps in services for special education, and if there are gaps, where are they? Without knowing that, and I don't know the answer to that question either, but without knowing that, I can't tell you whether lifting this cap is the right decision. We also need to make sure that schools are safe places for students to learn, and we must evaluate education policies and not just put money at problems in the hopes of fixing what is wrong if we don't know if those funds are actually going to fix. I think that mandates have been a huge problem. They're suffocating schools, both operationally and financially. So what we need to do on the funding issue for schools, I am very, very eager to learn more, and I'm committed to learning more. And because I want to get this right. Students deserve to get this right. Teachers deserve it. Principals, everyone does.
Thank you so much. And now we have the next question from Kim will be about MDE.
All right, great. And sorry for not introducing myself before. I'm Kim Meehan, member of the LAC, but also a high school teacher. How does your vision for public education in Minnesota align with the priorities of the Minnesota Department of Education?
Sure. So I read through the Due North Education Plan. And, I would say generally, in broad terms, these are all great, great visions and great aspirations. And so I wouldn't say that anything is misaligned. But what I would say is I don't see some things that I feel like should be priorities. So what I don't see in this plan is a focus on mastering or even proficiency in the basics. So math, reading, science, and writing. I don't see, a focus on student and parent accountability. I don't see a focus on creating safe schools, which we know when there's, when we have kids that are disruptive in the classroom and we're not servicing those kids and we're letting them stay in the classroom, three groups of people are hurt. Teachers are hurt. Students who are not being disruptive are hurt because there's a chaotic environment in which they're learning. And then thirdly, the student who is being disruptive is not getting their needs met, because a disruptive child, as a parent, I can just say, as a child, when they're being disruptive, something's going on. And by not addressing and putting priorities on how do we help the classroom be less chaotic, I really think we're missing the mark, and our classrooms are becoming a chaotic place where learning is hard. And I know that from stories I've heard of from kids, from my own kids who are in public school. I've heard it from teachers who are teaching in public school, former
Thank
teachers.
you.
Yep.
Time is up
Okay.
on that one.
Thank you.
Um,
Where did the Oscar music go? Did we
I
drop
don't
that?
know. I don't
Okay.
know.
That was like such a great thing.
I know. I'll try and hum.
If we like it, I could let it happen.
Let it happen.
Okay, all right, I'll let it happen.
Thank you, Rachel. And now thank you for your responses to those previously submitted questions.
Sure.
Now we have some questions that have come in from the community that I will turn it over to our students who are here to ask some questions. Our first is Evelyn, who is a 9th grader at the Hopkins High School.
The first question is, schools have changed how they deliver education, but not how they assess students. What are your thoughts on changing how to measure student success?
Yeah, that's a totally fair question. And I will tell you that when I met with the superintendent for Hopkins, we talked about test scores, and her, thinking was that she was resolute. She said, test scores aren't a full representation of a child's capabilities or how they're doing. And I think that's fair. I think that's definitely a fair point. And of course, she's the educator, and I certainly defer to her. It's a snapshot. Test scores are certainly a snapshot in time. And we know that some kids are really good test takers, and some kids are not good test takers. And some kids are super good at standardized testing, and some kids, cripple with standardized testing. When I was a kid, did not do well with standardized testing. So I totally understand that. Not being an educator myself, I don't have the answers for exactly how we would measure how a student is doing and whether they're making progress. That is something I would very much love to hear from people who are way more knowledgeable than I am in how to assess how kids are doing. I would imagine there's some best practices out there that are being used in other places, and I would welcome the opportunity to dig into that. And if there's other ways that we can assess how kids are doing, let's do that. I mean, we know that there's other ways besides standardized testing. And that's just, obvious, but I don't think that those things, it's not the end of the story. It's not the full story, but I think these test scores are, it's a snapshot, as I said, and I value other ways that we can see how are kids doing and where do they need support. There it is.
Thank you. And now Mia Osman who's one of our, no? Okay, Evelyn is doing two, and then you, Mia? Okay. I thought they were alternating.
My second question is, many Hopkins public schools are unsafe to walk or bike to. We know that walking to school has tremendous mental and physical health benefits for students. What will you do to expand the safe routes to school available for students?
Can you just repeat the final question?
What will you do to expand the safe routes to school available for students?
Okay, so I love the question. I'm not sure I have an answer to it because I'm not sure I know all of the routes to all of the schools. But maybe the best way for me to answer that is to say that yes, walking or biking to school is such a beautiful thing. I did it when I was a kid. My kid does it when he goes to school, and sometimes he's on a bike, and sometimes he has missed the bus, and so he needs to walk, and sometimes he'll call me and say, can I get a ride? I'm starting to walk, and I say, go ahead and finish your walk. It's really good for you. You get some fresh air and clear your head. So, I mean, I don't know what the best way to make for safe routes is. I think that we need to encourage, if there's, I'm assuming that there's adequate bike racks at schools where people can throw their bikes. I guess what I can say right now is just that, I support that. And if there's suggestions on what we can do, I would love to hear what those are. And I would be open to hearing from them because I value outside time for kids before they get to school and after. Sorry, that's my cat. If you heard a screech, did you hear a screech in the background? Yes, that's my two cats fighting. They're playing.
Nice.
So it's all in good fun. It doesn't sound like good fun, but it really is.
Yeah. As a fellow cat owner, I fully understand.
Okay, good.
And now I will turn it over to Mia. You want to introduce yourself, Mia?
Hi, my name is Mia. I'm a senior at Hopkins High School. I'm on the student board, and I'm really happy to have this opportunity because I wish to major in political science, and I also own a cat. So that was kind of random. So the first community question that I have is, Minnesota is one of 8 states that provides free school meals for students. In all of these states, the program is more popular than expected and more families are participating. When we add inflationary costs for food and delivery, all 8 states are over budget. How can Minnesota increase and stabilize future funding to feed students?
Can I just have you repeat the last 2 sentences?
Okay, so the last 2 sentences were, when we add inflationary costs for food and delivery, all 8 states are over budget. How can Minnesota increase and stabilize future funding to feed students?
Okay, so what I heard you say is all the other 8 states who are doing it have more money than they need right now or they've allotted for an inflation adjustment. Is that fair? Can I get a nod? Am I understanding the question correctly? Yes. Is that okay? I'll just go with that. Okay. Let's just assume for this. Yeah, let's assume that there's an inflation adjustment in the other 8 states. Here's how I feel about the school feeding kids in school. Totally support it. We need kids to be nourished, and it's very, very difficult to learn when you don't have energy in your body. And we need kids to have energy in their body. I feel, and I haven't studied this, so this is another caveat moment where I'm like, I have a lot more to learn. I'm a candidate at this point, and I'm eager to learn more. But here's how I think about it. I feel like there's a lot of people that we've allotted a lot of money and food to people who don't necessarily need to have access to that food, that they don't need food assistance, that they have adequate resources at home, and they have enough support at home where they can either pay for the food and it's not a hardship, or they can make their own food at home and bring it to school. So I have always felt like, let's find a way to have this food available for the people who need it, but not be paying for it for the people who don't need it. And I know that the concern of making it available to all was to avoid a stigma, which of course I favor. But I have to believe in this day and age that we have the technology to make it so that when you swipe your food card or your badge and you're going through the lunch line, no one knows whether you're taking, whether you're paying or you're not. And that's how I feel like we need to address the food cost issue. I have also heard firsthand from my own kids and others that there's a lot of food waste, and we shouldn't be paying for food in the garbage.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question.
Okay. Okay, the next community question that I have is, would you be willing to vote against your caucus position if it is in the best interest of your local school districts?
Yes.
Well, that was a quick one.
I have made it very clear from the onset of my candidacy that I am running as a Republican. I've been a lifelong swing voter. I am less concerned about political platforms and agendas. I'm concerned about what are the best policies. And I have an allegiance to voters and the district, and that's who I'm beholden to. And I've been very clear on that. That's on my website, and I will stick to it because that's very important to me. And it's one of the things that I've been disappointed about with the Democrat trifecta last year, was that it was party line all the time. And I know that there were Democrats who didn't want to vote always, but they did. And I think it's a problem. And I think we need independent voices and independent thinkers. And I commit to be that person.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And at this time, I'm going to give you a chance to do your closing statement. You have 1 minute. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I think the best way to sum up the key difference between me and my opponent, who is not here today, is to say this. Is that I believe that less top-down interference in education allows for the greatest opportunities for our children's growth and their excellence and their accountability. I believe that more control for teachers and principals allows and empowers educators to exercise autonomy in their districts and their classrooms and have full agency over how they teach kids and how they manage their classrooms and how they help kids succeed. It means that they have greater control over how to spend money as well. And I feel like it fosters personal accountability. And we know that personal accountability ultimately is the greatest path to empowerment and success. As a candidate, I am still learning, as I said, exactly how much of our resources we need for schools. Oh, wow. Well, I will just say thank you so much. I had about 20 more seconds, but I ill-timed this. So thank you so much for having me.
It's a steep shift from 2 minutes to 1.
It
Goes
is.
really fast.
And I think I was, yes, it absolutely is. But I am very, very grateful for the opportunity to speak with you all.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Brooke.
Well, excuse me. Thank you so much, Stacy, for being here today. The Hopkins LAC would like to thank you for your time today and for your interest in education issues. The LAC members, along with your constituents, enjoy learning more about your priorities for education funding and policies that will affect the future of Minnesota students. We appreciate your candidacy and wish you the best of luck in the November 5th elections.
Thank you all. Thank you all for being here and giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts on this important topic.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Stacy.
Thank you.